Monday, March 5th. I'll call the regular meeting of the Waverly City Council to order. Can I have a roll call, please?
Bergen.
Here.
Drinkow.
Present.
Kangas.
Here.
McKenzie.
Here.
Rothy. Here. Sheriff.
Present.
Waldstein. Here.
Thank you. All present and accounted for. If you'd all stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. First of all, welcome to March. The boys' state basketball tournament is started today, and that typically brings weather like we've experienced. And so it's just one of those things. I'd like to welcome each and every one of you here to one of the larger crowds, or the largest crowd that I've had a privilege of sitting in front of. But so we'll see how our business goes. And I'd like to approve the agenda, please, but it's been requested that we postpone item number 12. And so if someone would make a motion to do that before we approve the agenda, or approve the agenda and then amend it, one of the two.
I would move approving the agenda with the amendment of striking item number 12 from regular business.
Very good, thank you. Second?
Second.
Any other discussion on the on the agenda?
Just for clarification, the Champions Ridge discussion will just be delayed for a couple weeks.
Yes, sir. 19th is when we'll reschedule it for.
Okay, all those in favor of the agenda, or approving the agenda as amended, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Approved. Approval of the minutes from February 19th, 2018, the regular meeting minutes. Motion, please.
I move approval of the February 19, 2018 regular meeting minutes.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion to approve the minutes of February 19th is approved. Our guest councilperson for the month of March is Katie Traeger. I think some of you probably know her. She's a recent grad of Wartburg College, and I'm not sure which degree, but Katie, tell us a little bit about yourself and what's going on.
Hi, I'm Katie. Thanks for having me, Dean. I appreciate that. Yes, I am a recent graduate of Upper Iowa University with a degree in HR, and I actually just received my master's. So I've lived in Waverly all my life, and I'm just excited to be here.
Sorry that I got the wrong institution.
You're fine.
From all the discussion, I guess I was that way, but
We're all friends.
we're all friends. Katie, incidentally, was a large part of my campaign when I started to run this for this office. So, welcome, Katie. You have you can ask questions, take part in discussions. The only thing they won't allow you to do is to vote. So, moving on. This is the date, time, and place for a public hearing on an ordinance providing for rezoning of property on the northwest corner of 4th Street Southwest and 10th Avenue Southwest from R1 Single Family Residential to C2 Commercial, with accompanying statement of commitments from the applicant for amending future land use map from residential and commercial to commercial. I would open the public hearing. This is the intersection with the commonly referred to as the Casey's Project. And so I would open public hearing for comments. Carla, did we receive any written or oral?
We did not, Your Honor.
Thank you. Speak into the mic, sir, and
Thank you. My name is Jim Jansen. I reside with my wife Carla at 1024th Street Southwest, which just puts us about 2 lots north of the Casey's Corner. In other meetings, I've spoken in the general terms about our dissatisfaction with having a business of this volume near the corner, but I would like to redress one other specific item at this point. I'm well aware that there's other items on the agenda that will cause this to really be a lengthy meeting, so I'll make this quick. Our chief concern at this point is if the rezoning is to be approved, it still is our driveway safety. We see drivers northbound making left turns into the Casey's entrance off of 4th Street to be a dangerous location. It's not only dangerous for us as we turn south, what may be into opposing traffic, but also people coming down the hill on the 4th Street going north and then making a rather abrupt and quick turn to the left. We think that would cause unsafe conditions there. We also realize that if this project goes ahead, there is some discussions between Waverly and the DOT of perhaps modifying the whole 2-block section from 8th Avenue to 10th Avenue. However, we see that as really being years away. We don't see that on an immediate schedule where in the next couple of months after Casey's opens, that would be eminent. So if this project moves ahead, and again, we would register our disagreement with that there perhaps be some kind of transition plan in effect that would, for a period of time until the reconfiguration of the highway is completed, that there be a prohibition on left-hand turns as you go north. I just ask for your consideration on that. I also thank you for having this public forum on this topic.
Very good, thank you. Any other comments, questions from the public?
Could be on, please. Okay. Work.
This is
Pardon?
if you need it or something.
Okay. It doesn't, will you come back and help? I'm Sally Williams. I live at 435 8th Avenue Southwest. In respect for your time, I'm speaking for a larger group of neighbors who will share my concerns. This is a fence currently maintained by Casey's in Cedar Falls. Does it look familiar? The 2-sided cedar board fence they plan to build in our backyard. You don't have to go to Cedar Falls. Pardon? As soon as I get back, I'll do that. This is a Casey's fence currently around the garbage in their current location in Waverly. If this is being a good neighbor to the person on the other side of the fence in Cedar Falls, if this is being a good neighbor to our friends in the Waverly homes, I'm a little bit confused about what that letter of commitment might mean to me as a neighbor of Casey's. How does that fence get fixed? Do the citizens have to complain to the city? If the letter of commitment isn't followed, do we have to be the people that monitor the city to make sure that they're doing their job? That's not the role I want to play here. I really would like a neighbor who maintains their property, takes care of their property, without my having to go to the city. That's my concern. The intersection of 4th and 10th, labeled as a gateway node on our future land use map. With the opening of the Cedar River Parkway, probably one of the busiest intersections in our city. Citizens aren't going to benefit from the rezoning of this intersection. Adding 2 high-volume driveways, one on 4th, one on 10th, requiring lane turns to an already precarious hill. You can do traffic counts, you can do side of vision counts. Nobody knows that hill better than the citizens of Waverly. People are familiar with the hill, they're familiar with making that turn that Mr. Jansen was talking about, they're familiar with coming up the hill to a blind intersection, they're familiar with going up or down that hill with the ice. It has a reputation as being the place our local driver's ed teachers take their kids to teach them defensive driving. Casey's is telling you that 60% of their traffic, their business, comes from people who are already on the road. That leaves another 30 or 40% of people who are Casey's bound. That's going to be adding more traffic to that intersection. And am I silly in thinking that some of that traffic is going to be semis coming in for refueling? This one also creates issues with the neighbors. Can you be surprised that putting commercial next to residential is going to cause an issue with noise when one of those things is a car wash? We're a little bit concerned about our privacy. How would you like to entertain your friends on your patio in the afternoon on one side of that fence while a truck is delivering fuel to Casey's on the other side of the fence? We're concerned about our property values. Will our property have the same value as a quiet, private place as it will with a gas station in our backyard? And we're just plain concerned about the aesthetics, which is obvious from what I've brought to show you today. This plan is not going to relieve congestion. We've talked about people turning right, left, up and down. How about the person that just wants to get to work in the morning? Or the person who just wants to get home to their family in time for a family event at night? I'm concerned that this isn't a plan for the future. We're squeezing a business into that corner. We're cutting corners, we're making it work. What about in 5 years, 10 years? Waverly's going to grow. We want it to grow. And we want it to be someplace people can get through and get to where they're going. Just because it can be done doesn't mean it should be done. I would encourage you to wait and consider the C1 as an appropriate zoning for this land. I think the planning and zoning brought that option to you last month. Number one, it would attract a business with regular business hours or by appointment. It wouldn't have the noise factor that this business does. You wouldn't have semis coming in for refueling. And number two, it would show consideration for citizens who in good faith purchase property in a residential area with a full expectation that city zoning would actually protect them from a commercial business in their backyard. This one being a gas station. Once this corner is rezoned C2, all other options come off the table. Not only citizens of Waverly, but most of the people who drive through our town are going to deal with the impact of this decision. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name's John Campbell. I reside at 1001 10th Avenue Southwest. My wife and I have been members of Waverly community for nearly 52 years. First of all, I'd like to apologize to those that were at the planning and zoning for my bad extension of what I call 10th Avenue. It is actually the Cedar River Parkway. But my concern is that the amount of traffic that is going to be generated by the completion of that bridge and that thoroughfare to the exact intersection that you're talking and proposing for Casey's is in no way going to be prepared for the amount of traffic. It was also very upsetting to read in the Waverly paper that, while I won't mention the name, the individual that was commenting about it would be so brazen as to say, people will just have to adjust. Does that mean that there's going to be a half a dozen or 24 or 100 accidents? And then something will be done to say, I guess we didn't look at this close enough? I don't think that that's the proper planning this council should be taking. And for someone to indicate that the citizens of Waverly should have to adjust their driving habits because that's what the council wants or the planning and zoning has approved and said it's a good use of, I think that the council needs to consider that that intersection is not designed or cannot be for that type of traffic. I thank you for your time.
Thank you, John. Anyone else from the public?
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, members of the council. My name is Wally Pelds with Pelds Engineering Company, 2323 Dixon Street, Des Moines, Iowa, 50316, representing Casey's General Stores. I'm here before you tonight. We showed you a presentation of the views, of the buffering, of all the things that we've done, the extra steps that we've taken to work with the neighbors to see if something could be done to appease their worries, their concerns. I hear much about the traffic, yet that's something that we're still working through with the DOT because we've been asked to do that by your city staff. I do have a digital model that I would be happy to share with you, but it takes about 9 minutes to run through, and with the large crowd, I don't know that you want to see that. I can describe it though. Our study is leaning towards 2 left turn lanes from 4th going west onto 10th. An expansion in that way is what it's going to dictate by the year 2038. And these are things that we're going to suggest in our study. We've been working closely with the DOT. They also indicated that there would be a 2-way turn lane north of 8th. Going in through town. That's a Snyder's Associates that the city has retained that they're looking at, expanding that 2-way turn lane with 3 lanes going north of 8th to help alleviate some of that traffic. So we've taken that into consideration. And then additionally, on 10th Avenue, we're looking at expanding that and looking at retiming that signal, optimizing it per se, which it has not been done. Which indicates some of the traffic issues that you're having now. Again, I have to defer to federal guidelines, state guidelines for access control, location control. And again, I feel we're way ahead of the cart in terms of the first step is to rezone. And I know today, with the permission of the seller, we've had an agreement that if this does not go through, if Casey's does not purchase the property, the C2 zoning doesn't go through. So all of the, it would be a conditional zoning. So if we can't get our permits and whatnot, then that would take place. I'd like to just walk you through a little, it seems like all of a sudden Casey's picked a spot and said, hey, we want to upset the neighbors. Well, I want to, if I can, use a couple things from the city of Waverly. This is your existing zoning map. Oh, sorry. Okay. Excuse me. This is your existing zoning map, and this is the area we're talking about. We blew it up, and it's currently zoned commercial. Then that's R3, which is the multifamily. Then we proceeded to look at what R1 needs to be in a residential district. And if you read it, it says the R1 district is appropriately located away from high traffic and dense land use areas. Other information that we look at before we go to a site is what your comprehensive plan says. We've blown that up. That shows an L-shaped commercial that backs to most of the neighbors that have a concern. You know, we read the history of the minutes. They were approved. I mean, we don't come into this blindly looking to pick a fight. And we tried to be good neighbors. I take some offense to pictures of the old Casey's, which is really tired, for that dumpster. They have done some work on it, and we do have a phone call into maintenance that says we have to wait for the frost to come out to fix that trash enclosure. However, if you drive down Highway 3, I counted 7 dumpsters sitting out without a trash enclosure. I don't think that's a fair comparison from what we're proposing to do. Additionally, we're proposing to do a brand-new store, fill a tremendous amount of dirt, and as the pictures that you saw before, and I'm happy to show them again if you want to see them, but it gives perspective that we've effectively screened the neighbors from the noise. And in addition to that, let me find my notes. Your zoning ordinance calls for, where it says that R1 cannot be next to commercial, I think is a false statement. Because in the zoning ordinance, it calls for specific screening, whether it be a fence. Another option is a berm and some landscaping. A third option is very dense landscaping and only needing to be 10 feet wide. I will tell you, we have complied with all 3 and exceeded all 3. So what I'm asking for you tonight is that, you know, we didn't come in here asking to upset the neighbors. We didn't come in here without doing our research of what the comprehensive plan says we should be able to do, and trying to just be the best neighbors that we can. And I hope you recognize the effort that has been put into this. If you would have any other questions for me, I know Amy might have something to say. Do you have anything to add at this point? The Casey's representative is here if you need something specific from Casey's to ask of us. But I wanted to walk you through a little path of how we go through this. That we just didn't come in and say, hey, you know, we want to do this, so let us, you know. It's the information is there that leads us to believe that this is the corner to do it. I thank you for your time.
Very good. Thank you, Wally. Any other comments from the public? Hearing none, I'll close the public hearing. Council, to entertain a motion.
I would move the second reading of ordinance 1033, an ordinance providing for the rezoning of property on the northwest corner of 4th Street Southwest and 10th Avenue Southwest from R1 Single Family Residential to C2 Commercial District with accompanying statement of commitment from applicant for amending the Waverly future land use map from residential and commercial to commercial.
Second, please.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Council discussion.
Well, nobody else is going to jump in. I'll be the first one into the pool. Undoubtedly, you've all heard from a number of people here in Waverly about this, and they've all had a lot of different opinions. To me, what this boils down to, though, is a question of property rights. The city council has always been very protective of people's property rights, particularly when it comes to eminent domain, and very rightfully so. We have people that buy property, they build houses on that property, they improve their property with the trust that they can have confidence that the city is going to protect through their zoning code what that property can be used for, that property is going to continue to be in that, it's continue to be zoned in that way to protect their investments. Now, I appreciate all of the efforts, I truly do appreciate all the efforts that Casey has made to accommodate the people that live around this area. But as somebody who has personal experience with one of these issues where you have commercial development next to residential development, it is going to affect property, period. The best intentions of Casey's and the best things that they can do there and all the wonderful things that they've said they will do, it will affect people's enjoyment of their property. I think that before we rezone this property, we need to take a look and see just why we're rezoning it. You know, what are the criteria that we would use in determining whether this should be rezoned? Whether, you know, the rezoning trumps the property rights of the people that live there. And I mentioned this the other day, and I'm not going to belabor this point because I know all of you are going to want to talk on this too, but to me, it boils down to 4 different issues. The first is the rezoning consistent with the city's comprehensive plan? And it really isn't. The comprehensive plan shows a small strip of commercial development along 10th Street. It does not show a major commercial development in that area. Secondly, will the rezoning negatively affect the uses and character of the neighborhood? And here, again, it's inevitable that it will. You know, the question is just, you know, is it more important that we have this property rezoned? Does that trump the property rights of the people who currently live there? The third thing is, will the rezoning positively affect public health, safety, or welfare? Well, it seems like most of the people who have thought about this, and I'll admit I'm not a traffic engineer, so I really can't speak to this, but most people seem to think that would be just the opposite, that it would endanger public health, safety, and welfare because of some of the traffic issues. And certainly, you know, the existence of another convenience store is really not necessary for public health, safety, or welfare. So what it really boils down to me, is the rezoning required to address a substantial change or changing conditions or circumstances in that area? Now, you might argue that because of this now becoming a high-traffic area, and I'll remind the council that I'm the one vote who voted against extending 10th Avenue, but now that this is a high-traffic area, has that significantly changed the condition that was in effect when this was originally zoned as residential property? Because clearly the traffic on that street was not anything close to what it is now, and not anything close to what it would be projected to be in the future. I think that might have some merit to it, but I would like to point out that the character and circumstances of the adjoining residential area really hasn't changed. All that's changed is that by the actions of this council and the actions of the city, we've made this a high-traffic area. And we've made it very desirable for businesses that have a lot of traffic flow to be located in that area. Is that a strong enough reason, is that a strong enough case that the circumstances have changed to say, well, now that we've created the circumstances to make this a valuable piece of property for a high-traffic flow business, that we should trump the property rights of the people that live there and rezone it so we can put up that high-traffic area business? Where, to me, that's bootstrapping. We're saying we're bootstrapping because you know, we're creating the conditions that change what's happening, and then using that reason to say now we have to do the rezoning. I have a very hard time justifying that. The Casey's is a wonderful organization. They've done a great job. I love their pizza, I really do. But you know, this is just not the right kind of development for that area. It is just not in keeping with the current development, and it's not keeping with the character of that neighborhood. So I am going to vote no when this resolution comes up to vote. Thank you.
I guess,
Make sure you speak into the mic, Tim. if
I'll
you're-
move the mic this way, so because I tend to address people this direction more often. I kind of agree, and for the most part with you. I can certainly see why Casey's would want to jump on this corner based on the development that's coming, and get ahead of it. But I'm also on the side of caution that I really want to see what's going to happen with the traffic flows. We already know 4th Street is very busy. coming into town, coming north there. That's our main artery coming back into town for people who are even leaving town both directions during the rush hour. So we know there's heavy traffic there already. Adding the Cedar River Parkway and across traffic coming across is more than likely going to increase that. And we already know that the hill and other people have talked about that. That's not necessarily the safest portion of road in Waverly. Certainly on a night like tonight where people coming down that hill and suddenly having to stop and try to turn right there before Burger King. If they're not on their brakes at the top of the hill, they're probably in the Burger King parking lot by the time they're done. But I can certainly see Casey's looking at this as a prime location, and I understand that from a business perspective. But I look at more of the safety issues. I look at concerns about the traffic flow and not knowing what the patterns are going to be like with the new road opening up, and not wanting to commit to something that, looking back then in 3 years and going, boy, I wish we would have waited to know how the traffic really was flowing before having to, totally redo the roads to make it work or adjust as it is. As far as the comprehensive land use map, yeah, it's zoned commercial. I think it's appropriately zoned commercial, but I also look at directly kitty corner across that intersection at the development that's going in there, which was not a high-traffic one. We went to the rezoning for that so that they would be on the scheduled limited hours type of by appointment businesses, and I think that would be more appropriate for this location and would be consistent with the zoning along that corridor right there, without increasing volume going in and out on things. I certainly know when we looked at that rezoning of that property just north of the McDonald's and Miller's, that even their entrance had to be moved further down 10th Avenue or Cedar River Parkway to the east in order to get away from the intersection and have enough clearance to get in and out there. And so I'm not sure how those numbers then fit with a convenience store right on the corner, kitty corner across. So that's a concern of mine on that. I have other concerns with it in terms of the light spillage. I had asked about that. Yeah, you can put up fences and do some berming and stuff, but you're still talking about the convenience store is going to be up here and the homes are going to be down here and the lights are pointing down. So you're still got the spillage. To me, there's a definite concern with that. In addition, that drainage to the west there as they build that hill up, and they've talked about what they would put in for safety and whatnot, but even so, there's spillage, there's oil that drips from cars when they're getting gas, et cetera. If that washes down, that's going down into the creeks and going into our dry run and coming right back into the river and there. I mentioned the possibility of it being a sledding hill or something like that, and I brought up the old Holiday Station store in Waterloo on University Avenue that's now a Casey's. And I think it was kind of misconstrued that I was looking at that as a new recreational spot, and my comments were more meant to be that Holiday Station had to put up a fence to try to keep people from doing it because it became unsafe and became dangerous for kids to be running around the convenience store and the gas station while sledding, and it just, in addition, so I worry about that. So there's a number of real concerns that I have with this location for this purpose, and I would agree with Rod. I'm going to be voting in opposition to the rezoning for this, for those reasons.
Maybe I'll jump in here. For those of you that have watched how I kind of deal with these type of issues, I tend to be a process-oriented person, and I think the process in place is to guarantee all parties due process. I think the process that is in place on the zoning side of it gives an opportunity for dialogue to take place and hopefully help shape the solution. Having it go through 3 readings here, to me, again, furthers that process, and I have to compliment all parties in being willing to work together through that process. I think Casey's has done a great job of addressing concerns, modifying their plan. The residents have been professional in the way they approach it, requesting for dialogue, providing good dialogue. So again, I'd compliment folks on that. But when I look at the process, I go back to a comment that Ron made at our last meeting is, if we were not aware that Casey was going to do something here and we just had a zoning request come forward for C2, would we be approving it? And I can honestly say, no, I probably wouldn't. It seems to be a very congested area where what could be built in a C2 environment would have a negative impact. So I agree with a lot of what you said there. But then I also look at it that the cat's kind of out of the bag. We do know what's going there, and we have some fairly strong commitment to how they would address the residents' concerns. We have another piece of information tonight that further solidifies that if they're not successful, the homeowner or the property owner themselves is not looking for this to stay C2. So as I look at this, I fall back on the process is working. To me, there's one more reading, and at this point, I'm committed to seeing that process go through to that third reading. But I want to say that there are some big hurdles in my own mind that need to be gone across for me to give an affirmative vote on that third reading. I think there's still some room to work. I think there's still certainly the traffic study feedback from the DOT would be something I'd be looking for. One of the hurdles. I've got concerns with the left-hand turn going north into it. I've got concerns with the commitment letter. But again, in all fairness, I think if you drive by any business in town, there's probably very few that we'd want necessarily be faced up to our backyard. I think we all could do a better job of being good neighbors, those type of things. So again, at this point, unless things change here in the next 5 or 10 minutes, I'll be voting to push this on to the third reading with the understanding that there will be some serious hurdles that have to be crossed before I would give an affirmative vote on that third reading.
I'll jump in at this point then too. It is a high-traffic area, regardless of, I don't think it makes much sense to go back and second-guess the decisions that have been already made. So those decisions were made, and we are in a high-traffic area. For me, the traffic questions are not an issue. Not that I don't care about security or safety or traffic, but I guess I have confidence in both the city view of this and the DOT view of this, that will be resolved one way or another, so that, there's just too much at stake, so that I guess at this point I have confidence that something will be worked out. And personally, I guess I'll just interject here at this point that I do think it would be helpful to see that model. I don't know if it's that traffic model that Wally mentioned earlier. I don't know about tonight. I don't know if it has to be tonight, but I think at some point it would be really, really good for us to see, and for the public to see, and for the neighbors to see. I also think it would be worth, while I'm on that point, to take another look at the sight lines. I know, I've walked that property now three times at least, and tried to imagine what the fill looks like and what that does to the sight lines and the sound barriers for the neighbors who are there. So I do think it would be good to review that again as well, just to make sure we all have the best information to go forward with the decision. At the same time, I'll say that, from my planning and zoning years of experience, and thinking back to that and having that perspective on this, I do think it's a relatively dramatic transition to go from R1 to C2. We don't have C1 yet,
but we're talking about it. So, I have some questions there. It's a big change to make in a comprehensive land use plan. Yes, there is commercial there. It's not as deep. Somebody pointed that out, which is relevant, I think. And going from, R1 to C2 is a big change. So, how do we view that? I'm still kind of listening and processing that. I don't think there will be a changing character in the long run, or even the short to midterm, of that neighborhood. Unfortunately, or fortunate, however you're looking at it, what we're talking about is a transition from, north to south. The transition on the other side of the street has already happened. And if you look at, Burger King, Dollar Store, which is now vacated, an empty building, we don't know what's going to happen to that, bowling alley, there's already a change of character. I mean, we're really just talking in some ways about two properties that are R1 on that west side of the street. And then, yes, we have the condominiums that are further west, but probably only 3 or maybe 4 of those are affected, would be affected by this kind of change. So the reason I go through all of that is because I really do respect the work of the Planning and Zoning Committee and the Comprehensive Land Use Plan. I respect all of that, and so my sort of more purely theoretical orientation would be this is not a good transition. But given where we are now, both with the traffic and with what Casey has proposed, I wonder about the property rights effect, because we know what Casey's has committed to, which is highly unusual, especially at this stage of the game. But the residents know what Casey's has committed to. And yes, we will have to make sure that that is enforced. But the reason I'm waffling a bit on my sort of planning and zoning orientation is because what will happen if Casey's isn't there? It will be, whether it's Casey's is there or not, it's, I believe, correct me, anybody if I'm wrong, but I think eligible for up to R4 in terms of residential, so apartment building, with no commitment to, fill in so that your sight line is basically a berm and trees. Or we could have a C1 if we ever get to that point, which would be maybe some individual office buildings or a Verizon store. I'm just giving examples. I have no idea whether Verizon wants to be there. But, and still, much smaller companies, offices, do they have, forgive me, but the pockets that, Casey's might have to do what they say they're committed to doing? So that all gives me, or let's say it stays C2, and some other big, right now it wouldn't stay C2, it would stay R1. But let's say we have another, I guess we'd have to cross that road when we got to it if we had another C2 proposal. But I guess so with all of that, where I'm going back and forth, to me, in the end, when it's a gray area like that, my inclination is to go with what the neighbors want, okay? Now, but I want to make sure that we've discussed it thoroughly so that the neighbors all really, maybe not 100%, but most of them really know what they want. And that's why I would be in favor of getting more information with the traffic information and some of the old information out again for everybody to look at. And I would support a third reading of this. without a commitment to saying that I'll vote yes in the end.
Yeah, very good, thank you.
I'll go next. Obviously, I think it's a very complicated decision. That's why people have put a lot into thought into this. We've been out to look at the property. And I think people raised some very good points. I agree with Edie in that I think the character has changed of that part of town with the new construction on Kitty Corner from this property. And I was thinking, how do I think of that neighborhood? I don't really think of the condominiums as being in the same neighborhood as that corner, I guess, when I think about it. And when I went out there to those properties, when I looked at the diagram that Casey's did of the berm and the height of that property, that eased some of my concerns about the light. I don't think that light is going to be as big of an issue because of how high the property is. The news we received at our last meeting about the car wash having the doors shut and times of operation, that alleviated a lot of my concerns about the noise factor. When I was out there, I didn't really think that property was all that quiet now. I heard a lot of traffic. And I think that, I wonder if the berm won't help actually with some of the traffic noise at the condos, at least from the corner proper. But I'm not a sound engineer, so. I do have concerns about the traffic and what the timeline might be for those left turn lanes and expansion of those lanes and how that would match up with construction and how long would it take to have that completed compared to when the Casey's would be finished. I also wonder if we're going to be second-guessing every planning and zoning decision that's made about a busy intersection, because I'm not sure that's our role. If they've done their legwork and have considered this, which I hope they have, and I watched the hearings, that they've considered this in the land usage and future land usage map, I don't want to become a council that obstructs all new development. I don't think we're heading in that direction, but I think Casey's has done a lot of work on this, much more than it sounds like is typical, and I appreciate that. And the diagrams that I've seen that they've put out have been very helpful. So I still am on the fence, no pun intended, but I would like to hear more about the traffic, and I agree with Edie. I think it would be helpful to see that digital rendering or whatever you've got, because we do have processes in place, and we're really just being asked to look at the zoning, which is complicated. I also agree that we don't know what's going to go in there. We know the work that Casey's has put into this, and with any neighbor, you have to have faith that they're going to be a good neighbor. And so I'm in favor of pushing it forward and getting some more information and taking it to the third reading.
Brian?
Well, I think everyone else has said most of the things that I'm thinking, so I don't really want to repeat everybody else's comments. I think this is definitely going to be one of those situations where whatever decision we end up making, someone's going to be unhappy. I mean, it's a difficult decision, and I think both sides of this have made good cases, and this is just one of those examples where sometimes you have to make hard decisions, and someone's going to end up unhappy no matter what. The one thing that I do want to emphasize, or kind of is on my mind, is we really have seen Casey's bend over backwards to accommodate those neighbors. I think the berm, the fence, the tree line, the traffic studies, the speakers, the closing the doors to the car wash, I think they've done their best to be very good neighbors. And I'm not convinced that if we change this to C1 and took the chance to see who else ends up in there, that we're going to get someone who's going to have the same commitment to the neighborhood. Casey's, with good reason, considers this a prime location, and they're willing to jump through a whole lot of hoops to make it happen. And I'm just not convinced that if we had if we rezoned it C1 and someone else moved in there, that the new neighbor or the new people moving in would be just as accommodating. So that's my take on this. So I'm ready to support at least the third reading.
And I'll add to that, Brian, because you reminded me of it. I mean, it was part of what I was trying to say as well, but it also reminded me of right now it is R1 and needs to be changed to C1. And I guess I would just encourage the neighbors, and maybe you disagree, but I just have a hard time imagining that little parcel will stay, R1. And so that's what complicates it, further. So making the C1 comparison, I think or another C2 is a good one, unless you're really clinging to the R1, which in my opinion is unrealistic down the road.
Just to follow up on, or to respond to a comment that Ann made about second-guessing the zoning and Planning and Zoning Commission. I'm not in favor of doing a lot of second-guessing, and I certainly don't think the council should be micromanaging decisions. On the other hand, it is the responsibility of the council to sign off on what the commissions suggest, and if we think that this may not have been the best suggestion, then I think it's very much our responsibility to say, well, maybe not. Actually, when you think about it, we're kind of fortunate that we can have a conversation like this. Somebody informed me that the city of Houston, Texas, has no zoning laws. Are you aware of that? But now that seems a little astonishing to me, but anything would go in Houston. We wouldn't be arguing about where to put a Texaco station or whatever it is they have down there. But I really have to affirm what I heard Rod say, and he said it better than I would have, probably because he thought about it a little more carefully. My big concern is the safety issue. And I cannot imagine how we're going to put this proposal together in a way that would make it safe. I drive by that corner both directions almost every day. I did this morning. I pretended to be ready to turn coming on 4th. And, it's just, to me, I just cannot imagine that this would be a good scenario for that corner. I have real concerns about what the neighbors are saying. I think we should listen to that. In terms of should we go to a third reading on this, I'm trying to imagine what new information we would get from the neighbors, and I think I know what the neighbors are saying. I think we heard a lot of it articulately shared, and if we do this again, I would expect they'd come back and say similar things. So I'm not really excited about having another hearing. If we think this is not a good idea, some of us are not so sure. At this point, I'm really inclined to vote against moving it forward.
Okay. I think if we could move to the third reading, it would obviously give Casey's a chance to answer a few more questions, show their program, for lack of a better word at this time. But for C, I don't know whether it would change anyone's mind or not. I have had, and maybe this is a question for Ms. Costello, is it, Amy? I've had some comments from various people that, and I know that Casey's would not shut their operation down if it's constructed. But would Casey's agree to a meeting with the neighbors after, say, a year in operation to address concerns about appearance, for instance, or light spill or whatever? That's.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. Amy Costello, Casey's General Stores. Absolutely, we would consider setting up a meeting with the neighbors in the future to discuss their concerns. We would obviously encourage them to feel welcome to come into the Casey's store if it were built at that location, and to correspond with the manager, who will be a member of your community, who will be interested in the success of that store, but also the success of the community as a whole. So we would certainly encourage that on a day-to-day basis with our store management. area supervisors in the area, but certainly as a representative from the corporate office, I would be happy to meet with neighbors in the future. Again, we have the interest in having a good store here. We want to be good neighbors to the residents that are directly around the location, but we also want to serve the community as a whole, and I think that's something that needs to also be taken into consideration in this picture. You do have a comprehensive plan and a future land use map, and I know there is some question about the depth of the color of the commercial zoning on that map, and I think the city in the past city staff has addressed that, and correct me if I'm wrong. The intention of why the entire parcel was not listed as commercial for the future was to respect the owner that lived in the house, and that situation was expected that the owner would continue to live in that house, and so it wasn't foreseen to become a commercial area. However, there's not an owner in the house. We talked about property rights here tonight, and we've heard that discussed, and I think that's another consideration too, that this owner does have property rights in this property. And when you're looking at the 4 criteria that Mr. Dranko, you put forward tonight, I think there's a 5th criteria that appears in Iowa code that also should be considered, and that's the highest and best use of the land. Your Planning and Zoning Commission and your public here in Waverly took a look at your former future land use map, and it was revised in 2017. I believe there were 5 or 6 public meetings. In one of those, Ben, forgive me if I pronounce his last name incorrectly, is it Cahoot? Cohout. Stated at one of those meetings that the corridors were carefully looked at. That was a prime area to look at for potential changes for the future land use map. And when that was done, there were statements that that was a very comprehensive and close look at the map, and that corner was changed to commercial. At the time those changes were made, you guys had a C1 and a C2 in the code. So there's some debate over, well, did that red mean C1 or did that red mean C2, or could it mean either? The C1, as it reads this moment, my understanding is that might change here in a few minutes what the C1 was. But the C1, when you made that map change and when your residents commented and decided that that is a good place for commercial, included uses such as grocery stores, service stations, laundromats. It also, in theory, also included all the C2 uses because there's no distinction made in the code. So the community as a whole has input on that map. It was carefully considered by your P&Z, and I think that you would all agree your P&Z gave us a very close look when we were there. We answered a number of questions, and as there's been some comments tonight stated, maybe a little bit more thorough than we're used to at the rezoning phase, but we understood the concern put forth by the community and by the members of the P&Z and also here at the council. And so we've been happy to put forward some suggestions for changes that could accommodate and mitigate. We're not saying that corner will look exactly the same when we're there. It obviously won't. Will there be some changes? Absolutely. But we think that as a whole, the city of Waverly has decided that that corner is appropriate for commercial use. And when you talk about the buffering between a C1 or a C2 and the residential there, that house that is sitting on that lot right now is residential, R1. The red was drawn on 2 sides of that home when the commercial area was put into place. There wasn't a buffer intended there on the future land use map, yet if you look at the distance between where the KC store would be and where the corner of the condos are, there's a significant amount of buffer, more than, correct me if I'm wrong, Wally, 2 residential lots? Width between the store and the condos. Now, we have proposed a berm, dense landscaping, a fence. We've made numbers of commitments. And so I know there's been mention of lights and traffic and the concerns, and there's a lot of feelings about that, and I understand that. I understand that this is very personal to the residents that live there. It's very personal to this community. But there are facts and specific information that we can look to. I am not a traffic expert, and I've heard people up here say they are not a traffic expert, but there are traffic experts, and they have weighed in on this. We've had studies done. The DOT is obviously a traffic expert. They will be looking at any proposed changes. Certainly no one is in favor of an unsafe anything on that corner. We don't want an unsafe store. An unsafe traffic situation is not a good store for us. If you can't get to our store, there's no point in us being there. So we're certainly not going to consider a location that we don't believe, through our experts, that we can accommodate in a safe way. We also don't expect that the city or the DOT would approve us for a location that isn't safe. And with regards to the lights, I understand that it's difficult to perceive what that would be like. You might look at other convenience stores in the area. You know, if you look at the Quick Trip and the strip mall next to the Quick Trip on, I believe it's 3rd, those lights are aggressive. And those are not our lights. We have light studies that will show you that the cutoff on the LED flat lights that we are proposing, it's not, the bleed that is of concern is not consistent with the data as to what those types of lights can produce. So we're certainly not trying to undermine anyone's feelings or thoughts about this, but we would encourage a close look at the facts that have been put forward, a close look at the P&Z. If I'm sure you've all had a chance to hear what was said at the P&Z and what was presented at the P&Z and all of the things that they considered. We would just encourage you to, again, continue to ask us questions. We're very happy to come back for a 3rd reading and provide more information in the interim. If anyone would like to meet individually, I know we can't, because of open meetings laws, you can't meet in certain numbers, but a 9-minute movie or video isn't necessarily conducive to this session this evening, but we're happy to show it to you. I think, Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you might also have some overlays of potentially the lanes that would be painted, that could be reviewed just to see, obviously all of the traffic changes that are planned for Waverly in the future are not going to happen in one night, but we believe, and I think the DOT will confirm that, in the city as well, that the traffic issues can be addressed in a safe way. It's not like we have a plan to operate the store dangerously for 4 years and then it'll be safe. I think there are things that we can do now to address the concerns that were brought forward tonight. And I would encourage, if you have any questions, please let us know, and we would respectfully request the opportunity to return and address those and be heard again. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Amy.
If I could just add a comment to what you said, if that's all right.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. I think, the language, the lighting issue, it's sort of counterintuitive to think that Casey's is going to be up high and the people below aren't going to see the light. So I think if there's any way that you can show that is not an issue for the people who are behind you there, or show it so that they can determine whether it's an issue or not for them. That's one thing. The other thing, we keep talking about a berm, but when I think about a berm, I don't know how the rest of you are, but when I think about a berm, I think about maybe a little hill about this size here. When I was last walking this property and looked at some computer renderings before that to try to figure out what this berm is, walking down there, you would be buried in soil, and maybe twice your size almost, in terms of how much fill is going to go in there. So that, if there's a way to help us on council, for those of us who maybe not be as adept at this, and also for me, the neighbors in particular, to actually have a real visual of what they're going to be looking at. You showed that there would just be a little, I think the last time you showed that there was just going to be a little peek of the overhang showing from there. But I think if you could, if we could somehow get a more realistic view of how much fill there is in there and what the condominiums are going to be seeing, which is largely, as best as I could put it together for myself in trying to understand it better, is going to be a very big green soil area, grass area, and on top of that, minimum 6-foot trees from the beginning. That to me helped me see it just a little bit differently. And again, in terms of not what is a smooth transition from C2 to R1, R4, whatever, but how is it going to impact the neighbors? So that they have the very best information, both from their current experiences, which are totally valid, but also trying to get as much of a realistic picture of what it will look like for them, so that they can react to that. And maybe they already have, maybe you already have, and we'll hear that again in the third reading. But I guess that's just my request, that we make sure we've got the very best information out there as possible.
Okay. What you're really asking for, Edie, is a topography map and showing your base elevation and whatever else is going to happen around there.
But how it translates to a view, because not all of us can read those
Yeah,
maps.
no, I understand.
Real well.
Yeah,
I include myself in that. I'm trying to learn, but, yeah.
And I also know from experience that there are diagrams with the lighting that will show the beam spread or the light pattern and the cutoffs and all of that thing. So I don't know as anyone's would intend to say that, no, you won't see the light, because you may see it off in the distance, but as far as backlight, I don't think that's going to happen. So trying not to extend this out much further, but
How I could explain, I could run out to my truck and get my LED new flashlight. If you've ever seen how tight the beams are on those, the advantage of an LED light is that it allows me to prescribe, for a better lack of a better word, like most of the lights here broadcast. It just goes every direction. An LED light can be focused all the way down to a 90 or 60 degree beam angle, which makes it kind of like, your old mag lights, if you guys remember that. Or if you've had the experience of playing with the new LED flashlight, the beam is very focused. Now, can I tell you that you won't see the light in the dark? You're gonna see it, but it won't be directed towards you. We actually drove around a couple of places because we were trying to understand some of the concerns. I know we drove past the family video with the Jimmy Johns and then the Quick Star, and there are some floodlights within the city that are tilted at a 45. Those broadcast. I mean, that's saturation. That's what I use at a football stadium, at that kind of an angle, to broadcast light to make it almost daylight. Ours are very downward directional. We can also add screens to the sides so they cannot see the bottom of the light. They would just see, it's just like a flashlight being shown upwards, and you can see the beam of it, but it's not shining at you, if that makes sense. So,
okay. Very good.
and we'll have a rendering of that as well, so that you'll be able to tell what that looks like.
Any other discussion by the council? Roll call vote.
Bergen.
Yes.
Rankow.
No.
Angus.
No.
McKenzie.
Yes.
Rafi.
Yes.
Scherer.
No.
Waldstein.
Yes.
We've second reading passed 4-3. We will, in cooperation with Casey's, set a third reading for sometime down the road, and maybe give a chance to discuss some further concerns and go from there, so. Okay, moving on. This is the date, time, and place for a public hearing on Resolution 1832 on the proposed budget for fiscal year 2018-19. I will open public hearing for reports. Any comments, Carla, written or otherwise?
I have none, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. I will open the public hearing for comments on the budget, proposed budget. Place I have. I was looking, I have notes on some totals that were. so that I had them. I don't have to try and read them off the screen, so. Total revenues from all sources for the city of Waverly 2018-19 will total $30,317,265 in rough numbers. Expenditures by category, and of which there are several, $29,249,688. So, anyone from the public care to comment on the budget numbers? Hearing none, I'll close the public hearing. Entertain a motion for passage or consideration.
I would move Resolution 1832, approving resolution adopting the budget fiscal year 2018-19.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Council discussion.
Just for comparison, do we have last year's expenditure just for budget amount numbers? Oh, this one's 29. I know property taxes, we had to raise slightly to cover it, and it's, if I'm looking at the numbers right, we're raising.
You're talking about this year or last year?
17, 18.
The current one we're in, and then compare it to what
17,
we're looking at now. Oh, the estimated property taxes last year was a little over 6,061,000, and this year it's about 6,095,000, so it's going up to about 35,000, 34,000 thereabouts.
That's correct.
In property taxes.
Yeah.
As far as that, but in terms of expenditures on the overall budget, because we have the other revenue sources and $29 million budget, where does that fit compared to last year's? Do we have that? I was just looking at it.
Expenditures for the current fiscal year are $23,448,150.
So 23.4, basically, for those of us who need to round for mental.
And the 29 this year is coming in because we have some other expenditures starting to pay back Bremer, and
It's the capital expenditures for the Parkway, 20th Street, et cetera. So you have a significant increase in revenue and expenditures, both from bond proceeds and then the offsetting cost to do the projects from the bond. So that's why it's hard to make the comparison, because it is such a large jump just because of the capital.
but it's those big capital projects.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Where that comes from.
And just a reminder, we can decrease the budget if you have found something that we can cut or diminish, but you cannot increase what's being proposed.
By category, that's correct, sir.
Any other council comments?
Just want to thank city staff for all the work on this.
Going to say this is probably one of the budgets I'm most comfortable with because of the dialogue that went into it and the process we used to get into this result, and very comfortable approving it.
And just a reminder, either Mr. Mayor or James, what does Iowa law require? What's our deadline for approving a budget?
It has to be certified into the state by March 15, so that's why we had to hit tonight.
The other thing I would want to raise up is, within this budget is some of the budgeted for the backfill from the state, which is still being discussed as hopefully, there's discussion that they might pull some of that back, so if people are concerned about that, getting in touch with their state legislatures to keep that in for the city purposes. That was something that was promised a number of years ago by the legislator, and we need to make sure we keep that in. So that's a concern that goes with it.
Yeah, there's a bill that'll cut a third of it this year. My gut is it's gone within the next 2 years anyway. If it's not this year, it'll be gone the next 2 years. So we'll try to factor it in going forward, but even a third this year will be $55,000 that'll hit us for that we'll have to cover somehow. So That's the hard part with the way the legislature works. We have our budgets due March 15, school board is next month. They may go into June before they decide anything, so then you're already set, and you have to adjust accordingly. So we don't have the luxury of doing de-appropriation bills like they seem to do every year in the state level. And we'll just have to either look at our reserves or look at other costs in the current budget that we're looking at now to make that happen. But we won't know that until long after March 15th, I'm sure, when everybody's been approved at the county and city level, so.
Okay. Further discussion? Roll call vote.
Rinkow.
Yes.
Angus.
Yes.
McKenzie.
Yes.
Rafi.
Yes.
Sheriff.
Yes.
Waldstein.
Yes.
Bergen.
Yes.
Motion carried to approve the budget 7-0. Next item of business, this is the date, time, and place for a public hearing on a resolution instituting proceedings to take additional action for the issuance of not to exceed $11,050,000 in general obligation bonds. Any written comments, oral?
No, sir, Your Honor.
I'll open public hearing. Any comments? This is to cover basically the Cedar River Parkway. And I guess I have a question about item B on that. Acquisition, construction, improvement of all waterways, banks, things, I'm not sure what that is.
That part was to cover any issue with the South Riverside Park area.
Oh, that's-
as we look at the
okay.
possibility of
Yep.
sidewalks. So since that was a flood area at one point in time, they introduced that language in there also, other than standard for roadways and bridges, et cetera. So because of the way that's built as a park on the river, they've acquired that in to allow us some levities, how we want to spend the funding there for embankments and structures.
For first phase of South Riverside Park
Yes, sir.
improvements.
That's correct.
Okay,
So
thank you.
that parkway and the 20th Street first phase is included in the $11,050,000 plus fees, bonds, et cetera.
Okay. With that knowledge, any comments from the public? Hearing none, I'll close the public hearing. We'll entertain a motion from the council.
I will move Resolution 1833, approving a resolution instituting proceedings to take additional action for the issuance of not to exceed $11,050,000 general obligation bonds.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Council discussion.
And one big comment or a question, just for clarification from James, is these are being taken out as GO bonds, but we're paying some of the parkway back with TIF revenue?
The parkway will be paid with local option sales tax and TIF. You'll have another item later on in the agenda that allows you to do the TIF procedure. It's the urban renewal plan. And then the remaining parcels, whether it be 20th Street and the park, will be property taxes themselves. So that's the whole general obligation bond portion of it, and then we have a choice of how we pay it back with a certain amount of revenue.
We have to issue it under the GO bonds because of the couple of the projects that are property tax supported.
If you were to issue it under local option sales tax bonds or even TIF bonds, you specifically have to use a certain identified amount every year, and it doesn't give us that flexibility depending on revenue and income coming in to adjust that payment accordingly to best allow us to cover that. So we prefer to do the general obligation bond and then have that, again, that leeway to determine how best to use, whether it be TIF or local option. Because if one is short, you can move to the other. It just gives us some fluidity to try and make that happen. Otherwise, you're really pinned down. And I do think it affects a little bit of the interest rate as well. But general obligation is your cheapest interest you can acquire.
It just had some questions, kind of clarifying that, because I know we had had discussion about using TIF for the parkway and
Absolutely.
lost for that. So.
Okay, any other discussion by council? Roll call vote, please.
Angus.
Yes.
McKenzie.
Yes.
Rafi.
Yes.
Sheriff.
Yes.
Waldstein.
Yes.
Bergen.
Yes.
Rinkow.
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0. Moving on, consent, public comments for item.
Nope, number 4.
Oops, I flipped one too many, I flipped too many pages. It's here someplace. Oh, I do. Item 4 is a public hearing on a resolution instituting proceedings to take an additional action for the issuance of not to exceed $1,700,000 water revenue bonds. Any comments, written or oral?
No, sir.
Open the public hearing. This is for city share of water main construction on Bremer Avenue project.
Yes, sir. This will cover our first payment that DOT will be billing us for next spring.
Hearing no comments, I'll close the public hearing. Council discussion.
We need a motion first.
Need a motion.
I would like to move Resolution 1834, approving a resolution instituting proceedings to take an additional action for the issuance of not to exceed $1,700,000 water revenue bonds.
Second.
Council discussion.
So James, you say this is the first installment, or how many of them do we anticipate having?
3. And this one we did as a water bond because it doesn't affect our bond capacity, which we have to make sure we watch. And the amount of money we spent for the water main itself allowed us to do this, and it's applicable. The next 2 that we have would be probably more geo bond property tax.
Other discussion? Hearing none, roll call vote.
McKenzie.
Yes.
Rothy.
Yes.
Scherer.
Yes.
Waldstein.
Yes.
Bergen.
Yes.
Drinkow.
Yes.
Angus.
Yes.
Motion carried, 7-0. Moving on, public comments for any item that's not on the agenda. If there's anyone in the audience that wishes to speak, please limit your comments to 5 minutes or less, unless you feel that you need to have some more time.
Well, my name is Stephanie Schwinn. I live here in Waverly, and I wanted to make some comments about the current contract negotiations with the city union. It occurs to me that we don't often think about those city positions as being part of our public safety. We normally think of our police and our fire as part of our public safety. But if you really stop and think about it, people who maintain our water supply so that our water is safe to drink, people who take our garbage out of town so that we don't have disease and vermin in town, people who plow our streets, who are out working tonight while we're here, are all a part of public safety. And it seems to me that that's very important, and it's something that we need to take into consideration as those negotiations move forward. There's been some sentiment, I think, that there's not much of a difference between a handbook and a contract, and the truth is that it's as different as night and day. A contract is a legally binding agreement between the parties for a specified period of time. For a specified period of time that can't be changed until that contract is due for negotiation or expires, whereas a handbook can be changed arbitrarily. It's my understanding that in current policy that handbook could be changed with 3 readings of the city council, but in any event, it can be changed rather arbitrarily. And I think that creates a very, very much a sense of insecurity in our city workers about not just their jobs, but the manner in which their jobs will be conducted. I don't think that is very conducive to retaining the quality of employees that we have on our city staff. And I don't think that it will help us attract quality employees in the future if they don't feel that there's going to be job security. You know, these aren't just anonymous, nameless, faceless people. These are our friends and neighbors who live here. They have a vested interest in our community. They drive the same roads we drive. Their kids go to the same schools that your kids go to. Their kids go to the same parks that your kids go to. They're an integral part of this community, and a lot of them have invested a lot of time and energy in taking care of the city and in honing skills that they use to take care of the city. You most certainly would not want me maintaining your water because I don't know anything about water chemicals. You can't just hire anybody off the street to do these jobs, and I think that they're important enough that they deserve the protection of a contract. From a public safety perspective, I would be concerned. What if there was an issue with the water treatment? What if there was an issue with the large equipment that was becoming hazardous? And because now the employee is subject to being an at-will employee, they're afraid to speak up for fear of losing their job. To me, as a resident, that's a safety issue. I don't want to have to boil my water. I don't want to have to worry that the plows that are running down my street are not going to fall apart. I want to know that those positions and that equipment in the water is well maintained. And to me, that is a very important issue. There's been some discussion about convenience, that it's just easier, it's more convenient to have everybody follow the same handbook. Well, I think that public safety really trumps the need for that kind of ease and convenience. And I don't think that prior to this point that the contract negotiations, while they have been challenging, have been overly contentious. That's just the nature of negotiations. And so I don't think, in my mind, that's compelling enough of a reason. The ease and the convenience of having all of the employees under the handbook, I just don't think that's a compelling enough reason to move those employees from a contract to a handbook. You're completely changing the relationship that the city has with its employees. And in my mind, you have to have a very compelling reason to do that. And so those are my comments, and I appreciate having the opportunity to speak. And I want to thank our employees who are here and the ones who are out plowing our roads for all the work that they do. I appreciate that I don't have to get up at 3 in the morning to go plow my street. And so I just thank you for the opportunity.
Stephanie, before you leave the mic, what's your address?
621 3rd Street Southwest.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Good evening again. My name's John Campbell, 1001 10th Avenue Southwest. At this time, I'd like to ask the council to start negotiations or the proper procedures for the completion of 10th Avenue from where approximately my driveway is to the east. 10th was done in 2000. The expectation at that time was that there would be a completion of that roadway to the east, where obviously you are already going to have additional traffic coming also to the west, as you've already approved the bonds for the Park Avenue or Cedar River Parkway. I'm not sure where the 10th Avenue ends or starts. If it is at that intersection, then I would address it as you're going to be adding extra traffic. It's gotten very obvious to me. We've had 2 speed increases. My wife and I purchased the property that we live in at the early 90s. It was 25 mile an hour speed limit. It was then increased to 35 miles an hour. It's now 45 miles an hour. And I'm one of the most popular guys on that street because I get waved at nearly every time I take a turn into my driveway from the west. My wife has addressed it that she's been nearly rear-ended multiple times in a given day. She starts to slow down to 25 miles an hour, nearly 2 driveways away. But she says then it's a race to see who can get in front of her, as they know that she has the right of way in the right lane, not the left. So with that in mind, and I'll keep it under 5 minutes, I think the council is obligated that you came up with a bid that was much under what you estimated was going to be used for the Cedar River Parkway to at least enter into some type of negotiations to complete that road. It's not fair to me or the safety of anyone who travels that road to have additional traffic put on there. And you could say, well, you don't know that there's going to be additional. Well, I don't think there's anybody sitting at the council that hasn't been on 10th Avenue traveling east or west that would not say there is a definite traffic problem. We now have semis that go underneath the railroad bridge. When I purchased that property, you couldn't get much larger than a small van to go underneath the railroad bridge. So the changes that have been made there, I think, need to be completed. And I think 18 years is long enough to wait. I thank you for your time, and I hope someone will at least address that.
I think should be an item for discussion, John, and you're right, semis couldn't get through there, but some of them tried. So,
It was entertaining.
right.
My name is Dwight Albee. I live at 403 First Avenue Northeast in Waverly, and I've lived here for 35 years, and I love Waverly. I find myself in disagreement with the analogy of the difference between a contract negotiated in good faith and an employer-dictated handbook is the difference between Cheerios and cornflakes, and that employees only need to accept whatever forms, whatever is forced on them as terms of their employment. I think the proper analogy is that a contract is an agreement between employers and employees, just as our national constitution is a covenant between our representative government and the citizens of our nation. The handbook, with even with the permissives arbitrarily removed, changes or becomes the proclamation by the authoritarian few to attain control that is likened to the feudalism of English kings, which our forefathers chose to resist. Employees who have agency in their employment are loyal, creative, and productive, are more than those who are subject to the whims of their employees. Yes, city employees are free to move into other kinds and places of employment, and if Waverly chooses to destroys the good faith that has been established here with the contract, employees will probably move on, just as employees in Wisconsin and teachers in Wisconsin and Iowa are moving on to Minnesota. Although I don't agree that local contracts should be dictated by the state legislature, I would like to see Waverly at least retain the permissives so the dedicated employees of Waverly remain here to ensure the quality of living we have here in Waverly. Let us become let Waverly become, as this country has been, a beacon for those seeking a quality of life. There's a so-called movement to make America great again, but more Americans enjoyed prosperity and a quality of life in the late 50s and early 60s when unionism was at its peak. I don't know what those who are raising this chorus have in mind, but it seems to me that they want to return to feudalism and the bleakness that accompanies that form of social control. Lastly, it occurs to me that a couple of sayings are relevant here. Be careful what you wish for, and if it isn't broke, don't fix it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Albee. Any other comments?
Hello, I'm Karen Norton. I work for the City of Waverly. I work in the Accounting and Finance Department. My message and request to the City Council is to please leave the permissive items in our union contract. We aren't coming here wishing for more money. We're coming here asking to keep things the same. Put us in a position where we can all succeed. Right now, we come here, we asked for an extension last year at the same time. We were told, please give us more time. You didn't want to rush into anything. We've given you that opportunity. Come fall, we asked to We started the procedure to negotiate. Once again, we're asked to please give you more time. We've done that. Now, come January, we've been told the extension was off the table. You wanted to negotiate. We've asked you for, again, to give more time to you, and we'd like to come forward. We'd like to make this a better place for everyone, and if we all are on the same table with a contract that's legal binding, a handbook that has items that are not even addressed in there, that are in this contract. We have things that are in a contract. We know what's there. You're accountable, we're accountable. We'll all work together. We can make this work. None of us want to be here in this situation. We're not speakers. We want to just do our jobs. And if you give us that opportunity where we can all sit down and sit at the table and negotiate, that's what we're asking here for tonight. You aren't the first city that's been put in this position after this legislation was passed in the state. For example, Evansdale, Lake Mills, they've supported their workers, they've left the permissive items in their contract, and they've moved forward, and they showed support for their unions. And that's what we're asking here for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Chuck Ketcher. I live at 1503 Knoll Ridge Drive in Waverly. I'm not only a resident of Waverly, but I'm also the president of Local 288, who represents the city employees. We are here today because of concern we have as city's public servants, the employees of our city and their working conditions. These employees have been told that due to legislation passed in our capital in Des Moines, Iowa, in February of 2017, that several of their items had been removed from the working agreement. This working agreement has been in place for over 40 years. It has contained permissive items since it was first developed. These permissive items have been bargained and agreed to retain in this agreement all these 40 years. Now that it has been put in jeopardy with the notion all prohibitive and permissive items not be removed from this contract. Let's make this point clear as well. Our concern is not about money. It is simply about maintaining the written contract language for these employees, listing their working conditions, which again have been in place for over 40 years. The collective bargaining agreement has been there for recruiting and retaining better employees for our city. There is a fairness that only comes by having a grievance process with binding arbitration that needs to be maintained. As a resident of Waverly, I want the best for our people and our citizens, making us safe in all ways the public servants have been doing for over 40 years. We need our public servants being able to speak out without fear of retaliation or fear of losing their job, looking out for us. Let me make a few points. This contract has been in place for over 40 years, setting the working conditions for these employees. It is not broken and does not need to be fixed. It has been contained permissive items all these 40 years with continued renewal time and time again. City council members come and they go. City staff comes and they go. City administrators come and they go. But collective bargaining agreement has been here for over 40 years, the bedrock of our employees, though at all other changes. The city will be maintaining the same language in the public safety contract that has been in this one. The law change did not change the permissive items in the police contract like it did in this one. The handbook will not overrule the language in police contract. City management is reinventing the wheel by taking language out of the employee's contract and trying to make it fit in an employment handbook. This did not need fixing. If you support these employees, these citizens of your city, support their needs to renew their collective bargaining agreement and retain their permissive items. It has not been for the past 40 years. My hope is that you remember these points I have stated here and decide to retain the permissive items in our public employee contract. Thank you for your time.
Very good, thank you.
Hi, I'm Tom Bergman, and I live at 700 First Avenue Southwest. I've lived here in Waverly for 40 years, worked here all those years, and I also am currently the chief steward for the Teamsters Union at Nestle. I want to talk to you concerning these contract negotiations and just let you know what my feelings are about them. People notice what happens here in Waverly, and many of the things that we're most proud of, our city workers are responsible for, and that includes you people too. But it seems to me we run pretty well, but sometimes what seems to be working well, you can't see the total picture. And then you read in the paper that you guys are talking about stripping the contract of all these permissible items. And I don't feel that's right. I feel that you guys run this town very well. We don't need outside state legislatures telling us what's better for us. You guys make decisions and we live by them. And we've done pretty well. Permissive items don't cost you anything. It's a checks and balances system that makes the workers and you own up to what you say you're going to do. And everybody here seems to have the same feelings as they come up here and speak, and everything I wrote down here just mimics what they say, so I'm not going to waste your time with it, but I just want you to know that the people are paying attention, and we all vote here, and we pay attention to what happens here, and I personally have voted for many of you because I felt you guys were doing the things I wanted done. And I just want to tell you that I want this permissive language to stay in there so that these guys have a fair contract. That's all I have to say.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Bergman.
Mike Gabi, city employee, 31 years. Also the union chairman.
What's your address, Mr. Gabi? Address, please.
532 East Washington Street in Shell Rock.
Okay.
Union contract, handbook, looks very similar, but it's not. Legal binding document, paper. I've either emailed you or texted or called on the phone or talked in person with several of you. One of the conversations I had, the council person said, well, we need to both sides need to sit down, we need to look at this, we need to talk about it. Neither one's gonna get what they want. You have to meet in the middle and compromise. Sounds like a pretty common sense idea to me. And then I went home and I was thinking about it. That sounds exactly like a contract. You have two parties that meet, you negotiate, you work in the middle. We have 40 years of compromise. Why change it? Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Eric Stromberg, 504 3rd Avenue Northeast, and my remarks are timed at 4 minutes and 45 seconds. Mayor Soash, council members, city staff, and citizens of Waverly. I'm Eric, and I've lived happily in Waverly for 10 years. My family and I love our town and our friends and neighbors. It's on behalf of those same friends and neighbors who happen to be city workers that I'm here before the council to ask the council not to remove the permissible items from the collective bargaining agreement currently being negotiated with the city workers. My family just lives a few short blocks from here, up on old timers that call their neighborhood Snob Hill, and it always gives us a chuckle as a funny kind of outdated folksy expression, because I can assure you nobody snobby lives there in the neighborhood now. In fact, we live across the street from Ike and Mary Ackerman's old house, and we were lucky to get to know them as very generous and kind people in their later years. My wife and I joked all the time that our street was plowed first every snowfall because we lived across the street from the mayor. And we were grateful because we lived on a hill that could easily become impassable with just a moderate amount of snow. And well, wouldn't you know it, even in the years since the Ackermans have left us, because of the diligence and professionalism of our city workers, we are still plowed out very soon. I have a picture, 3:05 today, the plow just going right across just a few hours after the snowfall of our house. And there never was any special treatment for us. It was just the basic commitment of serving our community without favor. We have another old issue up on Snob Hill, that Street 504, or that 3rd Avenue Northeast. Mr. Cherry might be aware of this issue, but if not every year, but almost every year, there's a water main that freezes right in that spot. And almost immediately, every year, our workers are out there digging it up in the bitter cold, bitter freezing cold, water gushing everywhere, making a river down our street. And as I drive by, we're just going about our ordinary business. The workers are there restoring our water. I say a silent prayer for them, like, God bless those workers out there in the worst, most bitter conditions we have taking care of us. And now it's the time for more than thoughts and prayers for the work that our city employees do every day, and that's why I'm here. I'm just a guy. I don't confess to be an expert in any of the specifics pertaining to the city workers' ongoing negotiations. These would be the so-called permissible items. That's the appropriate thing for you and the city's bargaining representatives to sort out with the union. I only know from talking with city council, with administrators, with people in the bargaining unit, people on all sides of the discussion for whom I have a great deal of respect. These conversations only confirm for me the common sense notion that has been reflected in the comments here tonight, that there is a crucial difference in whether the governing document for our workers is in fact a handbook or a contract. And that crucial difference remains whether the fact that the text is 95% identical or 97% identical or 99% identical. I also think it's important to consider that less than 1 month from today, we will mark the 50th anniversary of the death of Martin Luther King. It was April 4th, 1968, so that will come up in less than a month, in Memphis, Tennessee, where Dr. King was killed. And why was King there? Well, for 2 months previous, the sanitation workers had been on strike over low pay and degrading and arbitrary working conditions. Despite being called an outside agitator by some, King came to support those workers. And while the garbage piled up and the National Guard was called in, King was fatefully murdered for his activism on civil rights in support of those workers. 2 weeks after that awful event, the city ultimately offered a contract which was agreed unanimously by the workers, recognizing their union, increasing wages, but most importantly, instituting the grievance procedures and protections that came with their contract. It was literally the final legacy of King's time on earth. I'm not in any way suggesting that the Waverly workers faced those awful, deplorable conditions that the Memphis workers did half a century ago. I raise the anniversary merely to point out that the bargaining framework that has existed, has been noted, for 40 years in Waverly is part of that legacy. Framework whereby the city and union bargained in good faith, not without instances of significant dispute, but many, many more times over history, the workers in the city coming together to arrive at a mutually beneficial arrangement through compromise and sacrifice. Just last week, I was very pleased to attend council meetings in this chambers and was very moved to hear the remarks from various council members about a new spirit that was on the council, one of mutual respect and cooperation. And it's that very same generosity of spirit that I ask the council to extend today to the workers who care for our community, to meet with them, listen to them and their concerns about the handbook issues that have coming up. Please hear them out and they will do the same. They are reasonable people who love our town just as much as anybody here. Please leave the permissible bargain items in their contract. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stromberg.
My name is Darrell Anderson. I live at 615 2nd Avenue Southwest, Waverly, Iowa. I have lived in Waverly for over 45 years. I have worked for the city that long. I was required to live in the city limits when I was first hired. I've been before a union. And what I ask is that the people that follow me don't go through the same thing I had to. I transferred from the cemetery to the street department, and I was guaranteed a wage increase. My foreman says, I will get that for you. I said, fine, I appreciate that. I never got that raise. I was working on the garbage route for 10 cents an hour less than a man doing my same job. It wasn't until the union came in that we were able to get the wages up to where they were together and some of the other stuff. I appreciated when they came up that I could have a protection if somebody says, you know, my brother needs a job and it's yours, that I had somebody to help me in my back. I would just feel confident if knowing that that's a procedure would be in hand, that would happen, and that these gentlemen here could keep that. I don't see it happening in this administration. I've talked to some of you. I've talked to a lot of you. I don't see it happening here. I'm just concerned about the future. So thank you very much for your time and listening.
Very good, Darrell. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Mark Taylor. I reside at 29981 280th Street in Shell Rock. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council, for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight. I'm one of your two city mechanics. In Juneau, I've been here 21 years. When I was offered this position 21 years ago, as a young father and family man, I had a big decision to make to whether or not to take a $4 an hour pay cut to come here. And I asked myself, am I doing the right thing? It didn't take me long at all to realize that I'd fallen in love with this community and my fellow workers. I had never felt more part of a team. I'd found my home. And I feel that way to this day. But the last couple of years have been really rough, with a council that continuously bickered amongst one another. What a breath of fresh air it was when the new council came together and acted like true professionals. So what a shock it was to me when I heard that city council and administration was removing all the permissive language from our contract. It left me speechless. It felt like a punch in the gut. We were being told that much of this contract language would be put into a handbook. When I reviewed the handbook, I found 19 items that are either left out completely or changed that would negatively impact our employees.
Mark, can you speak into the microphone?
Sorry. Our contract is a legally binding document, while a handbook has policies that can be changed by administration without any employee input. We saw these policies last year when an unfair vacation policy was implemented by one director and applied to only one department without council input. In instances like this, we've been able to file a grievance. But in the handbook, there is no language for a grievance procedure that would allow for an unbiased third party to make a judgment. So I ask you tonight not to remove the permissive items from our contract. It's just because state legislature says you can, doesn't mean you have to. In the 20 years I've been with the city of Waverly, we've been able to resolve many of the issues like this. I've been on several negotiating committees for several contracts. We've negotiated in good faith with the city and resolved many of these issues. So I find it very concerning that a contract negotiation we've only been allowed to meet once with a take it or leave it attitude by administration. This makes it impossible to negotiate in good faith when we get the door slammed in our face. Let's not rush into this like the state legislature has. Let's sit down like professionals and discuss this, how it will affect your employees and their families. At the end of your terms, you folks will go about your lives and careers, but by removing these permissive items from our contract, you're essentially busting our union and leaving our employees powerless. I don't think any city council wants to be going down in history as the ones that busted their employees' union. We're not asking to add anything to our contract. We just want to keep what we have. We want security and stability. With a contract, we have this. Without a legally binding contract, we have no stability. A handbook does not provide stability. What happens in a couple of years if we have unstable people elected to a city council, like in the previous 2 years? Without these permissive items in a legally binding contract, we could be at the mercy of tyrants. And I say could, without any scruples. I know you folks are above all that. But what happens when you're gone? So tonight I ask you to do the right thing and leave the permissible items in your hardworking employees' contract. Thank you.
Very good, Mark, thank you.
Allison Rasmussen, 502 4th Street Southwest. I'm here as an individual, but also as a member of the community who's also a teacher. I've not always been a union yes girl, but as a member of WSREA and ISEA, specifically over the last few legislative sessions, it's been really important for all of us to kind of hang together. And I know that this legislation was not intended necessarily for this conversation even. There are bigger, fatter cats at play when it comes to how we got to where we are right now in this conversation about permissive language and what can be in a contract and what needs to be in a handbook. So I would just encourage you to just continue to think about that, that this is not a Waverly conversation. It doesn't need to be a Waverly conversation. But I'm really proud to be a part of a community that is able to stand up for each other and talk to each other, and have had a really great feedback from a handful of you on the council already, being able to have this kind of conversation. So I actually only wanted to come up here so I can get out of here. I'm a little old lady school teacher, and as those lovely snowplows are going, that means the crazies are going to be at the school tomorrow morning. I'm sorry, Mr. Kangas. I know you have to stay. But thank you again for your opportunity. Please keep considering your employees in your hearts and your heads as you go forward in this decision. Thanks.
Very good. Thank you, Allison.
Good evening. I'm Dave Miller, 401 3rd Avenue Southwest here in Waverly. I've lived in Waverly for well over 50 years. I'm also a union rep for Teamsters Local 238 out of the Cedar Rapids office. I've been in negotiations and many public sector agreements across the state since the passage of the new law. And there was no intent in that new law to mandatorily strip all permissive subjects of bargaining, especially in this group here. As you've heard many times tonight, this group's been over 40 years. If the permissive subjects of bargaining were such a big deal, why wasn't they taken away years ago? These guys ain't asking for the moon. Matter of fact, it's my understanding that they have accepted your wage proposal. Just leave the permissive subjects of bargaining in there. I've talked to a few of you council members, and I appreciate your time. I provided you with list of what permissive subjects of bargaining can remain in the contract, or what can be removed from the contract as far as mandatory. There's a big difference between the two. We should have nobody from Des Moines, any legislator, I don't care what side of the party you're on, should be dictating to us what we should do in Waverly, Iowa. These employees in Waverly have given their blood, guts, tears. They've been out there when it's cold, hot, you name it, they're out there. All I'm asking you guys to rethink your position and maintain the permissive subjects of bargaining for this group. I appreciate the time and thank you.
Very good, thank you. Okay, first of all, on behalf of myself, as your mayor, and I think I speak for the council, I want you to know that we appreciate each and every one of you in the job that you do. I agree, it wasn't quite at 3:05 when the plow went by, but it was about 4 o'clock, I think, when plow came through, and even though there was a couple of vehicles on the street across from me, almost across from each other, the skill and the care that he took so that he didn't damage either one of them or any of them was greatly appreciated. And so no, I want you to know that each and every employee that we have is greatly appreciated. So, late hour, we're getting later. We'll move to the consent calendar. We'll take into consideration all of your comments and the discussions and see what we can come up with. Entertain a motion on the consent calendar, which consists of a pay request from Stanley Consultants for the Cedar River Parkway East improvements for 2018 for $6,987.50. A pay request from McClure Engineering Company for the 20th Street Northwest reconstruction for 2018 for $26,225. Approved purchase of 4 2018 Ford Police Interceptor all-wheel drive vehicles from Stivers Ford Lincoln of Waukee, Iowa for the police department for $81,086 and a requested delivery date of July of 2018. Some will question why we don't do local bidding. It's a state bid, or a state program that's offered to the departments, and I think we've bought from them several times over the past few years. So, John?
I think everybody can hear me. I just want a clarification.
Have to come up. Please come up to the mic, please.
Not a problem. John Campbell, 1001 10th Avenue Southwest. I'd like a clarification on line item number 1. What is considered Cedar River Parkway East?
From the end of Cedar River Parkway down by the soccer fields east across the river, coming out by the old Stummy Lumber Company. Pardon my French.
Okay, so it stops at the river?
It's from 8th Street southeast, across the river, and then all the way to 3.
Okay.
Includes a new bridge along across the river, plus the roadway.
Bill, you need to talk into the microphone too, please.
But it doesn't come up to the intersection of 10th Avenue and 4th?
10th Avenue from 4th, or Cedar River Parkway from 4th to 8th Street Southeast has already been constructed.
And that would be considered Parkway West?
It's just...
Because your line item specifically says Cedar River Parkway East. So I'm just asking for a clarification of how you're paying and whether or not that includes and where it stops, and is Parkway West then also?
I don't believe there's a 10th, or there's a Cedar Parkway West.
Okay, then why
Why
would?
is it called East?
It could easily be enough to be called the second phase or final phase.
Okay.
John, think of it as Phase 1, Phase 2.
Okay, so there is no technically east or west?
No, there is not.
Thank you.
Yep. Good question. Okay, I'd entertain a motion for approve the consent calendar.
I would move to approve the consent calendar.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any council discussion?
I don't like to extend the discussion at this late hour, but and can we get a real quick interpretation on the new police interceptor? Is this part of a regular ongoing update of the fleet?
Yeah, these will be the replacement of our marked fleet that we rotate every 3 years.
Okay, thank you. All those in favor of the motion to approve the consent calendar?
Yes.
Yes.
Say yes.
Yes. Yes.
All of a sudden,
Wait for it.
I had thoughts whether there was even a motion or not.
Is it okay?
Head's beginning to close down. Thank you. Regular business item number J. Item J, approved purchase of a 2018 A9 monsoon street sweeper from Elliott Equipment, Davenport, Iowa, for the street division. Entertain a motion.
I will move approval of purchase of a 2018 A9 monsoon street sweeper from Elliott Equipment of Davenport, Iowa for the street division for the net purchase price of $193,432.20.
I'll second the motion.
Council discussion. Mike, do you have any comments on this?
I'm here to address any questions you may have.
Reason it's coming this way through the consent calendar just because it was slightly over budget.
That's correct. Normally, we would have put this on consent, kind of prior to our discussion last week, this one, because it ran over, and I'd said if it wasn't budgeted or was over budget, we would make sure it was separate. But I just like the name, Monsoon. I think it's cool, so it's worth a little bit of that. But no, when we budget these out over a year in advance, it's hard to know what the trade-in may be, the wear and tear, the mileage, the hours. So once you adjust for that, sometimes it's off a little bit, and that's what the situation is here. And, we have the reserves to cover it. That's why we have them, just in case these things occur. So.
The other thing I want to point out, too, this is a dual-engine vehicle, so there's one engine for the chassis, another engine for the sweeper unit. And they're now requiring that the power unit for the sweeper meet the Tier 4 emission standards. So they've basically sold out and exhausted all the Tier 3s. So the manufacturers only make the Tier 4 now, and that has increased the cost.
Maybe just for the public's information, we heard it's coming from reserves, but do you maybe want to also just say how much over budget it is?
It's we were estimating $180,000, and it's in at $193,000. So
13.4.
Okay.
So when this thing comes past my house, will it sound like a monsoon?
I hope so. There's no claim to that, but I hope so. You can imagine it if it doesn't.
A lot of whooshing.
Okay. Any other discussion? All those in favor of the motion, say yes.
Yes.
Those opposed? Motion carried. Item number 2, approve purchase of replacement equipment known as UV disinfection equipment from MC2 Incorporated, Des Moines, Iowa, and a recirculation pump and a transfer pump from Lehigh Environmental Equipment of Omaha, Nebraska for the water pollution control facility. I would entertain a motion.
I would be happy to move approval of purchase of replacement equipment, UV disinfection equipment from MC2 Incorporated of Des Moines, Iowa, for the quoted price of $28,293.79, plus shipping, and a recirculation pump and transfer pump from Lee Environmental Equipment of Omaha, Nebraska for the quoted price of $19,130 and $6,218 plus shipping for the water pollution control facility.
Second?
I'll second.
Motion made and second. Council discussion.
Maybe the same kind of summary would be helpful for the public.
Sure. We had budgeted to buy these a year ago, but the other ones we had were in decent enough shape. We kind of kept them on a little longer. But at the time, we were kind of in between budgets, didn't get it factored into this budget. So the money was meant to go there, went into your reserves. Now we're taking it back out of the reserves, buying those, and then the additional ones for this year as well. So you do have some reserves that are coming into the play with this. But a good chunk of it was budgeted last year to get these. And so it's about $17,900 for the cash reserves to come out and cover this. Yeah, not as much fun as the monsoon, but definitely just as important when you're looking at what we're doing is trying to keep the equipment, from the pumps going to the UV lamps that help with the, I guess, I'm trying to think of the term I want to use, Mike, for the UV lamps. It's not purification, but it's
Disinfection.
Disinfection, thank you, of the treatment for the water as it goes through WPC. So
Now, as I recall, for most of the water treatment, we have dual systems. Are we getting one of these or two of these?
Just, we're replacing one of them.
We're replacing one of them, okay.
Any other discussion? All those in favor of the motion say yes.
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 Opposed? Motion carried. Resolution 1835, approving contract bonds and certificate of insurance from Kramer and Associates for the Cedar River Parkway East improvements and authorizing the mayor to sign the contract. I'd entertain a motion, please.
I'll move approval of Resolution 1835, approving contract bonds and certificate of insurance from Kramer and Associates of Grimes, Iowa, for the Cedar River Parkway East improvements project and authorizing the mayor to sign the contract.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any council discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Rafi?
Yes.
Scher?
Yes.
Waldstein?
Yes.
Bergen?
Yes.
Drinkow?
yes.
Kangas?
Yes.
McKenzie?
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0. Resolution 1836, approving the professional services agreement with WHKS and Company for the water pollution control facility, nutrient reduction improvement design. Entertain a motion, please.
I'll move Resolution 1836, approving the professional services agreement with WHKS and Company of Rochester, Minnesota for the water pollution control facility, nutrient reduction improvement design for the engineering fee of a not-to-exceed amount of $770,000.
I'll second.
Motion made and seconded. Council discussion? Mike, you indicated that you would like to enlighten us on that a little bit.
Oh, I just mentioned that due to the weather, the consultants made the wise decision to stay home rather than trying to make the trip from Rochester, Minnesota, and Mason City this evening. So I said that I would do my best to address any questions that the council may have.
You've given us a presentation on this before. I mean,
And am I correct? Some of the funding for this has already been built into the current solid weight or weight structure so that in hopes of not having to bond for as much when we get towards the construction.
That's correct. We've been set aside funding for this endeavor, but we're also going to be looking at the state revolving fund to determine what ultimately is in the city's best interest financially, how much to consider borrowing from there, in addition to how much we may have cash on hand.
The state revolving funds do not count against our capacity, which is why we also like them. Plus, they have a good rate structure, probably better, and we could maybe even get in the market for 20 years out, but you can pay them off earlier, which we would end up doing. So, good program. Glad they have it, and it'll help us finance this a little better going forward.
Any other discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Scher.
Yes.
Waldstein.
Yes.
Bergen.
Yes.
Drinkow.
Yes.
Angus.
Yes.
McKenzie.
Yes.
Rafi.
Yes.
Motion carried, 7-0. Item number 5, Resolution 1837, approving the final assessment schedule for the Bremer Avenue Water Main and Service Line Improvement Project for the 2017 stage of reconstruction. Entertain a motion, please.
I'll move Resolution 18-37, approving the final assessment schedule for the Bremer Avenue Water Main and Service Line Improvement Project for the 2017 stages.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Council discussion.
Just in general, are they falling in line with what we thought they would be when we first put the schedule together, or
They're actually substantially less. I think that if you look at the preliminary assessments for most of them, they were about 2,600, and they turned out to be about 1,750 for the basic work. And then we had several businesses and asked for some additional services, with some additional lines and different things that helped improve them. They couldn't have done that on their own. That cost would have been incredible compared to what we could do, and we already had everything open, so. And we'll do that with the east side. We're already starting to, we sent out letters this week already, so people should be starting to get letters, and we'll be signing people up to look at whether they can get new copper, especially in the downtown area, into the building, so that they don't have to tear up our sidewalks in the future. We can get that all up to date, and then it'll be all the way out to 8th, that they'll have new curb stops.
And then we did give people credit for sidewalks that had been replaced as part of the replacement program. We didn't basically make them pay for it twice.
Right.
Are you getting any feedback at all, formally or informally?
The feedback was mostly when we were doing the work at the time, and they all knew the numbers because we had the numbers for them. There wasn't really anybody that complained about the cost. Nobody likes to get charged for that kind of thing because it doesn't really change their water service, but I think everybody understood it, and I didn't really get too many complaints.
There was an option to have this assessed over a number of years, wasn't there?
In fact, what we'll be doing after this is we actually will send out an invoice type of thing, and then if people want to pay for it, they pay for it. If they don't pay within 30 days, then we certify it to the courthouse so that it can be assessed.
So that's what the extra $50 assessment fee is?
Yep, that's why they save that $50 if they pay within 30 days.
Okay, very good. Any other discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Waldstein.
Yes.
Bergen.
Yes.
Drinkow.
Yes.
Angus.
Yes.
McKenzie.
Yes.
Rafi.
Yes.
Scher.
Yes.
Motion carried, 7-0. Item number 6, Resolution 1838, approving the minor subdivision plat for the creation of parcel AA out of the City of Waverly right-of-way on the southwest corner of 4th Street Southwest and Technology Place. Entertain a motion.
I will move Resolution 1838, approving a minor subdivision plat for the creation of parcel AA out of the City of Waverly right-of-way on the southwest corner of 4th Street Southwest and Technology Place.
This would be the parcel that's adjacent to Mark's Auto.
I'll second that.
Council discussion.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I just have a question as a newbie here. I know later on in our agenda, we are passing a rezoning ordinance for that same property. What's the difference between what we're doing here and what we're doing later on in the meeting?
This is the platting process, so this allows us to get approval of the creation of the lot, because we had to carve it away from the rest of the land that the city owned.
So this basically attaches it to the existing
No, it
lot?
creates a separate parcel that we can now convey
That you can then
to the
zone.
next door, to the adjacent
Gives
property
it a
owner.
Legal description.
Okay.
We have to sever it from our expanded right-of-way in that area. So we're just creating a lot, and then we can transfer it to them. And then they will probably, we'll do a joint lot agreement, so they have to sell them together. They can't sell them separately in the future.
Sounds reasonable to me.
And the zoning is a separate thing, obviously.
Right.
Not that selling that tiny little parcel is going to be too attractive going forward, but you still want to have that so it doesn't slip through the cracks a little bit, and then that becomes an outstanding parcel, which is somewhat we pick up to clean up these issues.
You never know, someone might want to put a convenience store there, a very tiny one.
It'd have to be a lemonade stand, it's not going to fit much.
That would be an inconvenient.
Inconvenience store.
And
One of
keep in
those-
mind, if you don't have this, if you don't do that kind of thing, sometimes these parcels get lost, just like that little triangle that's on the north side of that. Because or the top of that on that diagram, because that was the one that was abandoned by Lakeville Realty out of Minnesota that no longer exists, and that's what we've picked up through tax sale.
Any other discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Bergen.
Yes.
Drinkow.
Yes.
Angus.
Yes.
McKenzie.
Yes.
Rafi.
Yes.
Scher.
Yes.
Waldstein.
Yes.
Motion carried, 7-0. Resolution 1839, approving an engagement agreement between the City of Waverly and Ehlers and Cooney, PC, in its capacity as bond counsel for proceedings for not to exceed $11,050,000 general obligation bond, Series 2018, and not to exceed $1,700,000 water revenue bonds, Series 2018.
Since the wording for the motion is exactly the same as what the mayor just read, I will move that.
I'll second that.
Very good. Motion made and seconded.
Setting a good precedent, I think.
Well, it isn't always exactly the same, but this time it was.
And this is a document that we have to sign whenever we do bond work. Spear will have a similar one that they usually send to us as well. It basically outlines our responsibilities and their responsibilities so that there's no confusion in case something doesn't go well. And we know who was supposed to do what, and it makes it easier for us to rectify the situation. Prior to these, there was a little bit of lawsuit issue. Your interest was too low. You promised this. That stuff doesn't happen anymore. This is why. You have these letters that this is what will happen for each party, and then there's no confusion.
And this is a firm that we've used consistently.
Absolutely. Ehlers is one of two in the state that really anybody would use. Dorsey and Whitney's the other one, and I've used Ehlers now for 13 years. And so, very good firm. They keep us, make sure that we do it legal and correct and don't have those issues. So.
Any other council discussion? Hearing none. Roll call vote, please.
Drinkow.
Yes.
Angus.
Yes.
McKenzie.
Yes.
Rafi.
Yes.
Scher.
Yes.
Waldstein.
Yes.
Bergen.
Yes.
Motion carried, 7-0. Resolution 1840, authorizing expenditure of funds for an urban renewal project and certification of loan expenses incurred by the city for payment under Iowa Code Section 403.19.
I will move that.
Second.
Motion made and seconded on Resolution 1840. Any council discussion? Hearing none. Roll call vote, please.
Angus.
Yes.
McKenzie.
Yes.
Rafi.
Yes.
Scher.
Yes.
Waldstein.
Yes.
Bergen.
Yes.
Drinkow.
Yes.
Motion passed, 7-0. Third and final reading of ordinance 1030, an ordinance amending chapter 100, section 100.12 of the city code, providing for amendments to the C1 neighborhood commercial zoning district language. Entertain a motion.
I will move the third and final reading as read by the mayor of ordinance 1030.
Second.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Council discussion. Hearing none. Roll call vote, please.
McKenzie.
Yes.
Rafi.
Yes.
Scher.
Yes.
Waldstein.
Yes.
Bergen.
Yes.
Drinkow.
Yes.
Angus.
Yes.
Motion carried. Item number 10, third and final reading of ordinance 1031, an ordinance amending the zoning map of the city of Waverly for property described in southwest Waverly on the southwest corner of 4th Street Southwest and Technology Place from M1 Light Industrial to C2 Commercial. Entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second,
Second.
council discussion. This is the parcel, Rod, that you were asking about.
Exactly, yeah, now I understand what's going on. Thank you.
It occurs to me you could actually put a tiny house on that lot.
Be in the ditch, though.
Do we allow tiny houses? Not to open up another can of worms.
Study session
Study session.
for November. Let's push that one off.
In the morning.
2020.
Okay. Roll call vote, please.
Rothy?
Yes.
Scher?
Yes.
Waldstein?
Yes.
Bergen?
Yes.
Drinkow?
Yes.
Kangas?
Yes.
McKenzie?
Yes.
Motion carried, 7-0. Third and final reading of ordinance 1032, an ordinance amending chapter 59 of the city code to replace the current wording with a proper, or proposed new chapter. Entertain a motion.
I move the motion as read by the mayor.
A second.
Motion made and seconded. Council discussion. For the public's information, this concerns the franchise fee that the cable TV suppliers provide to the city of Waverly. Goes from, to raise that franchise fee from 3% to 5%. And, well, the discussion, roll call vote, please.
Just one quick question. I guess in prior discussions around this, one of the reasons for reestablishing this was so that TAB could work with folks on different programming, those type of things. Can I assume that maybe December, we'll have that as a study session item that kind of resurrect that process and see how we're going to use those funds?
The current contract has it in the process, so once we get some funding, then we need to meet with Wartburg to discuss potential programming ideas.
And I think, I mean, just time-wise, it might be relevant that the contract, I think, between Wartburg and the city expires the end of August, and there's a 30-day notice for renegotiating that?
Right, I believe it automatically renews if there is no.
Okay, yeah.
It'll be a much earlier study session than December.
And part of that fee increase will go to upgrade the equipment for televising the meetings, council, planning and zoning, any other ones. I know there's already some discussion about maybe trying to upgrade the mic system at the time, and which.
I don't know if this would be related, but I just always feel so sorry for the people who come up and speak, whether they're presenting or whether they're just making comments. If there's something we could do about that in terms of them not having to hold this microphone in front of them while they're doing that, I think that would be
Part of the
good.
discussion already.
Oh, it is? Okay, good, great.
Just a hired podium.
Yeah, anything.
Automated boom mic.
Yeah.
I know Caney Mutual uses mics that are hung for the ceiling in a lot of their teleconference rooms, and they work very well. If we could maybe hang something over that area versus, I need to speak into the mic.
So we could get one that hangs straight down.
Please hang a mic right above me. and-
We'll get one just for you.
That's a great lead-in. That's really good. I like
Yeah,
that.
reinforcing my comment by poor execution.
Remind me again, not to, not that I want to open up a whole debate again, but remind me, please, of what sort of comparable franchise fees are in other cities similar to Wartburg, to Waverly?
When I checked with the commission, or not the commission, I don't know, what do you call the cable, the people who oversee the cable in Des Moines, they said that most communities that have it have a 5%, some have 3%. I think Independence has 3%.
But most have 5.
But most have 5. The majority, probably
And
over
even small
80%.
towns, not just larger cities. And the practice that we're using in terms of how we allocate those resources is not uncommon as well. Is that correct?
Right. A lot of communities will split their, the proceeds from that between the general fund and the operations of the, of their cable system or their channels, that kind of thing.
Carla, do you have a comment?
Am I correct that we have not received any written or oral comments from any community members on this?
Absolutely correct.
I would just reiterate my opposition to this based on, I think it should be spread out over the entire community as opposed to just those who have cable, choose to have cable, that there are fibers in place that are used by everybody.
In the mic.
I am talking about it.
You need it closer.
Any other comments,
I suppose
discussion?
I would comment that I would kind of prefer to leave it at 3%, but I also feel like we know that we're losing the backfill, and I feel like we're getting pressure from the state legislature to find creative ways to fund our city, and this is one. So I'm not real excited about it, but I feel like we have to, protect our citizens from, other cuts in the budget, so.
Some citizens.
Correct.
And Tim, how would you, I mean, I kind of understand what you're saying, but I don't remember, did you ever propose how that might, what that might look like?
To me, it would be just something that for the services that we're providing with the money that's there, since half of it's already going back into the general fund anyways, that's property, could be property taxes. It's going to be, you're talking $80,000. It's not a huge amount, $40,000 coming. To me, it's just a fairness issue that you've got just those people that choose to use cable having to pay for all of the fiber and cable to all of the homes and businesses in the city, which is used to collect data, including on water and sewer, or I think water and electric usage now too. So there are people that don't have cable that are getting to use those lines that aren't paying for it. That's just my argument for it, that it should be something distributed across the entire community.
So we would have to do like a fee or a surcharge to all residences, because even if it was property tax related, there is a substantial portion that don't pay taxes. So it would have to be some kind of a structure to hit every possible household or every potential person. I don't know how you'd get into rentals, and we would have to work something out to figure that out.
It'd have to be something to be discussed. I just think this is, yes, it's the easiest way to do it, but I don't think it's necessarily the fairest way.
September study session.
Other cities use a right-of-way ordinance, and they just charge you for using the right-of-way. So if you're actually putting cable or fiber or anything in the ground, they charge you for that. And it's a much more complicated process to do that and to manage it and maintain it. And it used to be that you only got your internet through the phone line, which they left alone, so they didn't want to touch the phone providers. So when it went to fiber that they put in the ground, they kind of missed an opportunity to maybe expand that to be able to charge people for actually putting fiber in the right-of-way also, which I think would have been a simpler way of doing that.
Okay, but yeah. I mean, maybe what will happen is down the road, there won't be any cable, so.
Well, and that's
It'll
the issue,
disappear.
is more and more people are cutting
Yeah.
the cord, is the term is, that this, do we keep jacking the percentage up to get those handful that are still holding on to it, or do we come up with a way that is actually fair, that everybody is paying for the use of the same thing?
But I think 5 is our max. I think that's all you can do. That's it.
Right
At
now.
the top, and unless, of course, state changes something like that. But yeah, I understand what you're saying completely.
And I would say too that while I was calling around to different cities use it in different ways. Not all, some of a majority of them maybe put it all into their general fund.
All of it?
Yes. And really, we have to be careful how we use it, because there was a case in Des Moines that was against it. But, we've done our homework on this, and I would think that the utilities is probably charging an administrative fee to get that through the lines as well. Doesn't come to us, though, however.
Okay. Any further discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Sharon?
Yes.
Waldstein?
Yes.
Bergen?
Yes.
Drinkow?
Yes.
Angus?
No.
McKenzie?
Yes.
Ruffy?
Yes.
Carried, 6-1. Item number 12, discussion on Champions Ridge has been postponed. Discussion of the City of Waverly Employee Handbook. We each received an updated copy this evening. I had gone through it prior. And,
I guess maybe because of my role with working with the union on negotiations, those type of things, my sense is the desire here is for the council to at least feel comfortable enough for this document to be shared with all employees and start the process of getting their feedback. I think unfortunately, the message in our first negotiation with the city staff of, we know the current handbook does not include a lot of the items you're concerned about. Please give us until March 5th to move those items in there, might have been missed. So I'm sensing from talking to some of the represented staffs and the comments here tonight that there's an assumption that the document that was authored back in 2008 is what we're supposedly going to manage against. And I think it's important for all to know that we are not taking any substantial benefits away from the city staff. We're certainly looking to move some of those into a document that we feel that can be managed to easier for all parties. And I guess, again, I'm hoping the council feels that it's in good enough shape to forward it on to all employees. And then maybe part of our discussion tonight is a timeline for getting their feedback and the process we want to go through to try to weave their dialogue, their requirements into what we finally come up with. If that's everything staying in the handbook, if that's potentially a few items moving back in as permissible to the contract. Again, being a process person, that's what I thought we had laid out with the union folks, was the next step in the process was to give them the updated employee handbook for their review and input. So
I have concerns about that, and that is not all employees have emails, and so then we're going to be making at least 75 copies of a 65-page, 62-page document that isn't even final. So I'm not sure if council wants to go that route.
I guess my assumption would be we'd be giving it to the union representative, and he could disseminate it, at least within the union staff, how he wanted to.
I think it's fair. We can
What
make
about
sure
the
each
other
department
staff?
at least has a couple versions as well, if there's that issue. But I do think that is what was discussed. We would try to incorporate everything that we could. I'd give you a list of everything that is in there, the page it was on. Yes, there are a handful of things that are not in there, but for the most part, we tried to put in as much as we could. A lot of it is exact verbatim, some is not, just because of the content of it. But it is a good starting document, which is what we had discussed at the time. And it was a matter of weeks to get it here, and unfortunately, things went as they went. But that's what we have today, and that would be my request, unless anybody's opposed to sending it out to start the process of getting comment back. It would just be, at what point in time would you like to have it all back? Since I don't want to delay this out for months and months and months. I mean, we need to move at some point to get this ratified in, so to speak.
To Carla's point first, I think it's important that every employee see this and have an opportunity to give us input on it. I mean, couldn't we find out easily enough those who don't have email? And we wouldn't have to make hard copies for everyone? Or even email, I mean, it's right here on the agenda. Can't, there be access made to a computer if someone doesn't have a computer to pull it up themselves. I mean, and, you know, there are, I believe, if I understood this correctly, I mean, there are 8 employees who aren't under, who are not part of any contract. And I think it's important for them to have the opportunity to have any union contract, to have the opportunity for feedback as well. I'm interested in an expeditious timeline too, but I also want to make sure we do it carefully and give everybody the opportunity to weigh in on it.
Why can't it be, it's a public document, or it's a draft, public draft document.
Right.
It could be put on the website, you know.
It could be, I guess.
To me, one of the things that's been frustrating about, as Dan says, the process is that the negotiation usually is done more or less in closed session. You do some initial proposals that might be made public, but then the negotiations themselves are done in public. This has been chosen to be taken public, so I don't have a problem with then putting it for the public to add their commentary too, because it is the citizens of Waverly that are ultimately responsible for directing us as the council with how we spend their tax dollars and run their city.
It is. I guess I would want to hear what employees have to say in a sense, but even that is not something you commonly see or hear, because again, these are work rules dictated by the council, and the public itself should not be determining how this council wants to run this city. That's what you were elected to do. That's what you engage me to do on your behalf. So that being said, yes, I do think the employees, because the issue at hand, have a certain amount of time that they need to have to review this, but then also it is up to you to dictate how things will or will not be ran in the city, regardless of what you do receive. Now, things can be altered, they can be tweaked, absolutely. It's your prerogative as council, we will act accordingly. But I think staff may have a comment or two if you do.
I was just talking about getting it to the employees. I think the easiest way is if the administration turns it out to the directors. We all know our staff. We can just give it to 6 people and we'll get it to our employees.
Right.
That'll be 100%
They'll know who
covered.
does and does not
Okay.
have access accordingly. And if we
Okay.
forward it there, they can then forward it on or make the copies needed, and I think we can
Okay.
get it distributed accordingly.
Now, the other thing, a question, a clarification I have, my understanding is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but, because I wasn't there, but my understanding is that at the one meeting that has taken place, that the union representative rejected out of hand anything that would be a partial move toward including permissives, that it was all or none from their perspective. So does it even do us any good to talk about, potential modification of what's before us right now?
Well, and that's a difficult one to ask, because again, we're trying to stay somewhat in a closed set. I mean, I agree with Tim, now it's public everywhere, so I guess doesn't matter in a sense. We still want to have some decorum about this, but,
So should I not have said that?
no, you're fine.
Oh.
It's all been said already 15
Oh, okay.
times
All
publicly,
right.
so it's not a big deal. But what I'm saying is there does seem to be a line in the sand drawn that everything that's been requested is to keep all the permissive items in. You heard it multiple times tonight, keep all the permissive items in. So is that the stance? I don't honestly know.
I guess that's
It
the
depends
comment.
on how you want to approach it going forward, but when you look at the articles in the paper, the flyers that have been printed out, everything is a standard, put all permissive back in. So I understand what you're saying completely, and I'm not sure what the answer is to that.
I mean,
You as a council to move
again, this is
forward.
my perception, not to talk over you, but my
You're fine, sir.
perception is that the union representative is doing his job, and his job is to protect his union staff. So the fact that he has voiced the opinion that it's all or nothing, and that's not his words, that's just how it's being interpreted, I think we should, in good faith, look at it as a point-in-time comment. Now, if we continue to hear that after they've had a chance to look at the employee manual, that takes on a different perspective. But
Okay.
again, I allude to it again, I'm process man. I'm hoping all parties will let the process play out, and the next step in this is to give them what we think is a reasonable way to approach labor relations, given the current environment and what we're all trying to achieve. And hopefully that generates some constructive dialogue after they've had a chance to digest it and provide our feedback.
Practically practically speaking, is there a deadline by which we need to have this process finished?
It's hard to say. I know the contract itself needs to be settled sometime at the end of April. I think that's what the agreed upon extension was and no further. So depending on how this would occur, I would say, yeah, the sooner we can arrive at some kind of an agreement, whether it's this being acceptable or other parts going in being acceptable or whatever the mechanism may be, that we would want to do that a little sooner than later, just so we have a handle on where are we really at with the overall process to get this finished at some point.
I just had a couple clarification questions on the handbook, just for public sake. I mean, talk about, a lot of people were mentioned that the handbook could be just easily changed, but it would still have to come before the council for any changes.
Correct.
Yes.
We would have to vote on it by ordinance.
Correct.
And resolution? It's not
Unless you
ord-
wanted to place it in a city code, which makes it more difficult to make changes in a sense, and you can certainly do that, but small changes then are 3 readings.
So, but
Such
but
as
to
if
clarify,
we-
it's not an easy, just a quick willy-nilly change. There would be discussion, there would be
Absolutely.
a chance to have input from employees, from citizens, from anybody that wants to talk about it before we would make a change. It also then, by the same token, in some ways makes it easier than a contract, which may be locked in for 3 years, and if there's a change that needs. Excuse me. If there's a change that needs to be made within 3 years, it could be made. Versus a contract that would have to wait until the contract would be renegotiated.
Yeah, there's different ways to look at it, the way you look. I know there's talk about rogue councils and things like that. You could do a single-year agreement, and it could all be taken then without being put in a handbook. And there's a lot of ways to talk about this and put the negative spin on it or try to be positive. It just depends on how you want to approach it. And we're trying to do the best we can with this. Going forward, it was the direction I was given. Again, we can't get too deep in that either. We don't want to cross too far into this, but that's where we are today. This is what we're instructed to do. The handbook is there. Everything we can incorporate in that made sense, in our opinion, is in there. We will distribute it accordingly unless there's someone that thinks we should not do that, and then we will get feedback in a certain amount of time. I mean, is 2 weeks enough time? And that's what I'm looking for, is some kind of consensus to start with. Is a couple weeks enough time if we get it out basically tomorrow or the next day?
I think you'd want to give at least 2
Talking-
weeks, yeah.
For the first set of feedback.
Exactly. We'll have another draft. There is no rush to approve it, other than we need to finalize something at some point in time.
Two weeks would be regular meeting, 3 weeks would be study session. We'll bring it back for the study session.
We can certainly do that for the March study session.
I have one question. I guess I've talked to several employees, and there's been interest expressed in having some sort of dialogue that isn't actually negotiations with council, and I'm just wondering, what are the options for that under the new, I don't know the ins and outs of.
Well, I'm not sure how you would do that, to incorporate all council in so that you're all
It's a
hearing the
meeting.
same thing, because that would be, of course, illegal, being in violation of open meetings law. And so unless you have that session happen multiple times and it's exact verbatim, it's very difficult to do that. That's why even when we have negotiations, we bring information back to you, whether it be in closed session, which we'll have shortly here. Dan is there as well. We bring back exactly what was said and discussed. We get our feedback, we move forward. You can do that in a sense. It's just, again, we're getting to where we're trying to have a negotiation process, and if we're getting multiple facets of information in and out, different people, et cetera, how do we know everybody's on the same page to go forward? And it just makes it difficult.
So is there a second set of negotiations scheduled?
Not right now, there isn't.
It was alluded to that the next conversation would be after this document was shared with them. So again, not to over-influence the discussion here, but my thought was we'll follow through on the commitment we have. We'll get the updated handbook out. 2-3 weeks seems to be reasonable for them to get written comments back to us, so that can be shared in some fashion with the council. And then based on that, written feedback, we would then schedule the next face-to-face conversation to say, okay, where are we at? And again, if that's a subset of the council, that seems to be the way we've approached those discussions in the past. See us going forward, and then again, at some point, it probably needs to come back in closed session, so all council can be apprised, brought up to date.
Right, I would want to almost council's permission, put a closed session on that study session so that you can freely talk about where do you want to go, how would you want to approach the next session of negotiations if we get to that point, so that we have a structure going into it instead of having to only be able to publicly say certain things, et cetera. So that's what we'll plan to do then for the study session, is have whatever items are on there as well, go to closed session to discuss this formally with all the comments that have been brought forward, and then get some kind of a plan to how do you move out of that and into another formal negotiation at that point.
I just think the more conversation we have, the better. Because I think in the press releases and things, I think there were assumptions made about the council's intent, and, they made a very complex situation very black and white, which it is not in real life. And I think that the more dialogue we can have with the city employees, the better.
I agree with Ann, and I think, a couple of things that I'm just going to say are not helpful, in my opinion, in this conversation, is to, keep trotting out that these are arbitrary decisions. If any of us around here are making arbitrary decisions, we should not be reelected. And none of this is arbitrary. I think what we all agree on, which we have to keep in mind, is that I haven't heard anybody be critical of any of the city workers, quite to the contrary. So there is a lot of respect, I think, for our city workers, and I think my read of us as a council is that we're very sensitive to that, and we're not about to make arbitrary decisions, and we do in fact understand the difference between a union contract and a handbook. But let's keep working through that and decide, where we each individually stand when we go to vote for, what we're going to do. So, creating an unnecessary, sometimes I understand combat is necessary, but when it isn't necessary, it's not helpful.
I think the drama just takes away from the message. And I think, we might be new, but we're not naive and we're not stupid. And so I think I agree with Edie. I think we weren't given the credit that we deserve for how thoughtful we're being about these topics. And we do respect the workers. The city can't run without them. But we have to deal with what the legislature handed us and deal with the aftermath of that. And we're doing the best we can, and I'm sure we'll have good discussion in closed session.
And we have to, from my perspective, I think something that really complicates it is we're dealing with two different unions and a handful of employees who aren't in either. So what is the best thing for the overall workforce? And I don't have an agenda here by saying that, but it just complicates, I think, one's understanding and approach to, what's the best protection and support of the employees we have.
Well, it's what's best for the city.
Right.
And as I read the two documents, I had several sections where I thought the employee manual is more favorable to workers than the union contract. And it's also not typical that any employee gets to help write their own employee manual.
That is
I've
correct.
never gotten to do that except when I ran the business. And so I think they want to have dialogue with us. I certainly had very productive, respectful conversations with the employees that contacted me, and I'm glad they did contact me because the tone was totally different from what was in the press, which I was grateful for because we had much more thoughtful discussion about the issues and our love for the city and our belief that it's very important that we keep the goal in mind, which is to keep the city running smoothly and to have people want to come work here and want to come live here. And that got lost in the debris of the dramatic press releases. I understand it's important to make your point, and sometimes you have to be, use harsh language to get your point across. But I think we get farther when we have mature, respectful conversations.
I think it's just one final comment, and then I'll just kind of listen. I think what Ann is articulating is the desire. We want feedback from all employees. Again, the difficulty is how do you then manage that? And I would like to suggest that those that are representatives still feed that feedback through their representatives, and those on the council do the same, so that at least it's somewhat managed by a small group versus 100 and some people trying to manage the dialogue, those type of things, so.
And I want the comments from the employees, honestly, not from the public. That's not what this is for. And that's my only intake. I understand the need, and that's why they elected you, though. I do not need people from outside the city, people that don't work for the city. I don't need any of that, because honestly, that's not what this is about. This is about the employees and the council relationship, and that's what needs to be going forward. So I don't need this rewritten by somebody out of Des Moines or anywhere else local it isn't here. You know, both sides have that issue going on. That's why it's very hard to bite my tongue for a little bit of that, but we did. And we just need to take care of our own as we sit here in this city, and as our employees, as you as a council deem correctly to do so. And that's what I want to have, is the input from the staff, not from the others in the community, because they don't work here. They don't deal with this necessarily. This is between us and our employees.
Well, summarize a couple things. One is the comment that was in last Tuesday's paper that the council needed educated is what triggered my response. And I just felt that, no, we're not. We are an intelligent group of people here, and we are on top of it. But in summary, I gather that we're going to print out manuals for everyone and get them to their supervisors, or?
I'm just going to email copies to the department directors, and they will get them to their employees.
Okay.
How they work it.
All right.
Just the format that'll be in is a PDF versus a Word document, so it's a little more controllable and
We can do that.
being edited, those type of things.
Yep, that's fine.
And if we set a response time in 2 weeks?
If we
That
get
would
it
give
in-
us time to prepare for the
That would
study
give us
session.
time for them to prepare for the study session.
So we'll make sure when we send them out, we'll put a date accordingly in the email so that everybody knows when it should be returned and comments sent back.
I'm going to disagree just a little bit with James. Just for myself, I'm not speaking for council, don't have any authority to do that, but I will listen to any citizen who calls me or wants to talk to me. And I can see where this issue could be broader for some people than just what happens here. So I guess I'll say I'm fine with receiving input from the public. I think maybe where you were headed, or maybe not, but what I would agree with you on, I think, is if we're talking about, the nitty-gritty of, a rewrite, of the policy manual, I agree, that should be something that is more among us. But for general input, after people have looked at it, because it's available, citizens can see it, right? It's out there as a supporting document, so.
I don't think the latest version is.
Not yet. 'cause
Oh,
you
is that
hadn't
right? Oh,
authorized
I
it to
see.
go out at the time. So we
Okay,
didn't
so are
want to
you?
put it out there prior.
Okay, so the first version, all right, well, in any case, whatever's out there that's publicly available, I'm fine with people contacting me, but I agree with you in terms of an operational sense that, in the end, that's not where the final thing will be written, but for input and information, I'm.
And that's where I was as well,
Okay.
Dee Dee. Please understand that. It was not that we don't want any comment from anyone else. I don't need someone else taking it upon themselves to rewrite it for us.
Yeah.
That's what I'm not wanting to
Right.
see. I want comments and feedback, not a rewritten for us. That's what we will do in the end.
Right. Track changes from 100 different people on the document.
Exactly.
Well, and
You can
the city
color code it.
council, it's our job to represent the public. So they should be talking to us, telling us their opinions, and we'll give those to you, and you will lead the negotiations and the discussion, but they shouldn't be going directly to you saying, hey, you should
Yeah.
change this line in this document, because that's not what they're doing.
I think we're all on the same page.
So do you want our comments within 2 weeks
Yes,
as well?
please do. Because there was other sections not related to any of this that we added from the last time, whether it be adoption, paternity, return. We added a section there as well, and then some of the tweaking also. So by all means, send council comments also.
Okay, are we?
We're good,
wrapped
sir.
up?
Yes, sir.
We're wrapped up. Staff comments.
You have boards and commissions yet, sir?
Oh, boards and commissions, leisure services. Anything from? Okay,
You aren't going to tell us how you are getting along with the library and this big pie fest that you're planning? Who's winning that?
Yeah, so it's the expectation of all of you, since you work at City Hall, is to bring your bags here, and even if you're the library liaison, you still need to bring your bags here, right, Sarah?
That's not going well, is it, Adam?
Ab, I want you to know I brought heavy food and put it in the container for you tonight.
Yeah, so you're not going to mind if I divide mine, are you?
City Hall is behind right now.
Okay.
I think I need some leisure services after this meeting.
okay, we're done with leisure services. We'll move into staff comments.
I don't think we have any more, sir,
Okay,
considering the hour.
considering the hour. City council comments. Anyone on the council?
Let's see, I can start here. I was pleased to see that the tree removal for Cedar Parkway has begun. I was especially happy that they got out and beat the weather. They were out last week and they got a lot of work done, because if they had waited until today, it probably wouldn't have gotten as much done. So hats off to Benton's and getting their work done. There have been some concerns expressed about this tree versus that tree and protecting certain trees. I believe that concerns can be sent directly to James and Bill, and I know that they would, well, I believe they would like the opportunity to address those personally and get them taken care of. I know that there's been some concerns, and I think that when word got to them, they were on top of it and taking care of things. So I think that any public that has concerns about the tree removal process should express their concerns to Bill and James, and it will get taken care of.
Can I add one thing?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Staff comments.
Please don't drive down 12th Street to look. It's quite a mess down there, and it really does cause some problems if they're working down there. If there's a lot of mud, there's a lot of things there, and their only place to turn around is basically in somebody's private driveway. So
We don't need to be towing somebody out of the mud because they thought it'd be neat to go see it. And that's where we're getting close to being down there. There's too much traffic.
The other thing I wanted to say, Wartburg women's basketball team is doing well again. We hosted the first and second round of the NCAA tournament this past weekend, and we'll be hosting the third and fourth rounds this coming weekend. So this is a boon for our city in terms of restaurants and hotels. So the next time someone tells you that Wartburg isn't doing anything good for our community, remind them that we're bringing in people to those restaurants and hotels.
And does the $8 gate fee go to the college, to the NCAA, or to somebody else?
I believe it goes to the NCAA because my faculty ID card doesn't get me into the games anymore.
Yeah,
It's all NCAA run.
mine don't either, so that's not a boon to the local economy, but that other stuff is.
There's other stuff, correct.
No, they.
Any other comments from council?
I wanted to give a shout out to the Senior High Robotics Club. In their first year, they've made nationals. So I want all these local employers to be out recruiting those kids for 4 or 5 years from now.
Nothing here. I can't top that.
Katie, any comments this evening? Hopefully you didn't get scared away. So.
She's awake.
She's awake.
We've usually been much better with this council.
Well, Brian, you took my thoughts away on the Wartburg women, but yes.
Mayor, I do have one real quick comment. I will not be here for the meeting on the 19th. I will be traveling for business. So, in case I forget to alert the mayor of that in the future, please know that I'm somewhere in the middle of Kansas on the 19th. And
Well, then you may want to call in.
You have reception.
Take your ruby slippers.
yeah, I was going to say, if I see Toto, I'll let you know. Lion or the.
Okay. Another comment that it's a few days away, but daylight savings time will start next Saturday night, early Sunday morning already, and some of us are looking forward to that. So that we've got a little more daylight here and there. Did you bring those books, Carla?
Well, they're here.
They're here, okay.
Not in this room. But I have them, yes.
Okay.
I can have
No, that's fine. I'll mention it anyway. There's a small book out that the returning council people have called 13 Ways to Kill Your Community.
It's a very good read.
And they were furnished by Diana Blake. About halfway through the one I have, and it's excellent. In fact, I talked to Carla, suggested that when we have our strategic planning session, kind of a retreat or whatever, that gentleman would be a good addition to the group. So not sure where it'll go, but at least it's that far. So
Sorry, go ahead.
she has 3 new books for each of the new council people, so we'll get those to you. And
That answered my question. She asked me if I had a copy of the book, and I said, no, I didn't. So I'm glad to hear that will be coming my way.
no.
And just to keep us all in compliance, when we originally received copies, we were told you can't give it to a council member, it has to go to the office. So if somebody replaces you on council, you have to give them your book, just so you know that.
I'm supposed to. Now, when she ordered those, she ordered an extra one or two, one for the, quote, the staff to read, and, because I have mine marked up, and they will not get it back unless.
The bookstore is not going to give you full credit for that.
You're going to have to be mayor for life.
Still watching to hear that comment.
Anyway, that's all of my comments. And,
If that's the case, I would like to make a motion that we enter
Yeah,
into
thank you.
executive session to discuss collective bargaining strategy for the upcoming city unit negotiations by section 20.17, paren 3 of the Iowa Code, or the Code of Iowa.
Second.
motion made and seconded. Any discussion? Roll call vote.
Chair.
Yes.
McKenzie.
Yes.
Rothy.
Yes.
Waldstein.
Yes.
Angus.
Yes.
Trenkow.
Yes.
Bergen.
Yes.
Motion carried.
May we
We're,
go to have a
yes.